wanted to be sure that everyone had a chance to get here near the beginning. I'm Sheryl, Vogt, Director of the Richard B. Russell Library's Political Research and Studies. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Special Collections Libraries. I'm going to briefly introduce you to this building, and I will then talk about the importance of the Georgia Disability History Archive that we dedicate today. The Russell Building provides a home to the University of Georgia's 3 Special Collections Libraries: the Harvard Rare Book and Manuscript Library, the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies, and the Walter J. Brown Media Archive and Peabody Awards Collection. Together they constitute the University System of Georgia's largest and most distinguished assemblage of books, original documents, maps, audiovisual, and other rare material. Everything from learning play tablets to digital video. The foundation of this building, both figuratively and literally, is a 30,000 square foot, 35 feet high storage chamber capable of holding 4 million volumes or 220,000 cubic feet of archives material. This mostly subterranean vault features state-of-the-art climate control, fire suppression, and security. But this building is much more than a repository. It's a learning environment, one that benefits the University of Georgia and is also that has national and international scholarly impact. In the 3.5 years since we dedicated this facility, we've had researchers from 47 states and 23 nations. While UGA Special Collections have that national and international profile, our largest group of registered researchers, that is those who conduct original research in the reading rooms here, are UGA students. Since opening in 2012, the Russell Building has hosted 1,400 public programs, meetings, tours, and other events. All bring new faces into the building and the exhibit galleries, increasing the public's exposure to what the libraries do. These are programs that engage the public in educational dialogue and that contribute to the intellectual life of our university and community. Our exhibit halls promote among the general public a deeper appreciation and enjoyment of Georgia history and culture. More than 45,000 people have visited. Last year, we welcomed more than 1,000 students from local K-12 schools, including all 8th graders in Clark County. The libraries have a new 8th grade initiative with the county that will bring its social studies teachers to the building for all of their in-service training days this school year. More important, this building includes classrooms in which professors integrate special collections into their teaching. Over 600 classes have met since we opened, reaching more than 10,000 UGA students. We now have classes meeting nearly every day in this building. These classes encourage students to use the raw materials of history to build their own understanding of the world. Research shows that students who learn through using archives build observation and summation skills, learn to analyze and problem solve, and learn to work collaboratively. The emotional impact of working with original material enhances learning, and working with archives helps students to engage more fully in other aspects of their courses. Now I want to talk about why we are here today. In 2013, the Shepherd Center and the University of Georgia's Institute on Human Development and Disability formed the Georgia Disability History Alliance. The goal was to bring together Georgians interested in preserving and celebrating the state's disability history. To that end, the Alliance partnered with the Russell Library to develop the Georgia Disability History Archive. Today, over 100 advocates, self-advocates, organizational leaders, researchers, and other partners have joined this important effort. Presently, the archive houses 20 collections, nearly 20 collections, and is steadily growing through the efforts of the Alliance and the Russell Library. Estimates suggest that as many as 1 in every 5 people could be considered disabled. So knowledge of disability issues can be useful for anyone who works with or provides products and services to the wider community. By providing primary sources for the study of disability history, we can move from a medical framework of understanding to the full spectrum of human variation. The next generation will be called on to solve problems we cannot even imagine yet. Through the access to the Disability History Archive, students in a wide range of disciplines will be in better positions to challenge the barriers which may prevent disabled people from participating fully in their communities by promoting the ideals of inclusion, independent living, and community integration. Whether it is the treatment of individuals with disabilities or the struggles of families that have endured to find assistance for a family member, documenting the stories of our ancestors and our work today will help future generations to understand the importance of advocating for disability rights and funding. Remarkably, the Alliance functions uniquely as individuals and group representatives brought together for a common interest in an informal, freestanding network. With no budget or structured workplace, in less than 2 years we have met quarterly, established the archive, a website, Facebook page, Tumblr account, and adopted a logo. We've also created a timeline and a booklet for soliciting collections and started an oral history project. Today we are hosting our first conference on Georgia disability history, and we're dedicating the archive. So I take a second to say, yay us. We've done so much in such a short time. And I have to say that this is mostly because of the library's work with the Alliance. We're learning so much about advocacy and activism, and that's a great plus for us. So I hope that those of you who have not already donated a collection will think about what you may have of your own or someone that you may know who has some materials to donate, and encourage them to do so. We hope that you truly enjoy your visit with us today, and you'll come back many times in the future. You have an investment in this building, and we welcome your coming, bringing your family and friends. It's my pleasure now to introduce my colleague on campus, Dr. Zoe Stoneman. She is director of the Institute on Human Development and Disability. So, and while Zoe is coming, I'd also like to ask Beth English, who is director of the Southeast Easter Seals group.
I just love surprises. Don't y'all like surprises? Easter Seals every year gives a number of Distinguished Service Awards, and this year one of our recipients was not able to be with us this year, and so I asked if I might be able to share this with you all today because of the pivotal role that Zoe played in the History Project and in all of her many, many years of work around disability. Well, I've been doing it 40, so I know you've been at her almost as long as me, but we'd like to present you with this Distinguished Service Award, so thank you.
What is the commercial about not liking surprises? Thank you so much. That was a great surprise. If you're going to have surprises, that's the kind to have. I just had the wonderful opportunity to spend some time vacationing in Italy, which was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And in the process of doing that, one of the things that really struck me was that Italy is a whole series of civilizations built on top of each other. That the current structure is built on top of the Roman Empire. Under the Roman Empire, the Etruscans had what was known as a golden age of peace and prosperity that dated back to 900 BC. And we went to a museum that had incredible artifacts from that era. Beautiful jewelry, tools, and things that were everyday life for the people who lived on the hilltops, which is where the Etruscans settled. And in addition to that, under the Etruscan civilization was found yet another civilization. And the artifacts from that civilization were so delicate and so fragile that they were taken out, they were photographed, they were cataloged, and they were buried again. Because the best way to keep them safe was to keep them underground because of the risk of them deteriorating when exposed to the elements. We in the States have nothing like that type of history. We think about 100 or 200 years as being an incredibly long period of time. Within the world, that's just a blink of an eye. Within disability history, within the last 100, 200 years, within the last 50 years, just some incredibly remarkable things have happened. And while Rome has managed to keep a lot of artifacts of things happened in 900 BC, we have managed already to lose a lot of artifacts of the disability history movement that is much more recent. So this is a very exciting endeavor to basically try and hold for not just the next generations, but many generations to come, all of the wonderful things and not so wonderful things that have happened in the disability movement, particularly here in Georgia. Understanding our history, understanding disability history, to me is important for two different reasons. One is, in this past, we've made some big mistakes. If we understand why we made them and what they led to, we cannot make them again. And on the other side, we have had some incredible learning. We have some tremendously wonderful learning and information and wisdom that if we don't appreciate it and know that it's there, we will try and reinvent the same thing that someone already perfected a number of years ago. So our history builds best when we understand what has happened in the past. And in that light, chapter that for me has had a huge impact on my work that dates back to 1975. I just want to pull a couple of things out of this before I go into talking about Rivers Crossing and its history. In the 1960s, there was a lot of work done on children living in institutions. A lot of studies, a lot of research around that issue. And in the early 1970s, there was a major effort that was led by 10 federal agencies. 31 different task forces were pulled together, and 93 contributors added their wisdom to this endeavor. And a gentleman, a faculty member at Vanderbilt called Nick Hobbs, some of you may be familiar with his work, pulled all that information together into a series of volumes. And I just want to read to you, just thinking about what's going on in Georgia today, a couple of short excerpts from his chapter relating to institutions and recommendations. Parents resort to institutionalization because they seek relief from the physical and emotional strain of continuous 24-hour care of severely handicapped, remember this was in the 70s, children. Because economic pressures force them to work rather than stay home. Because they cannot afford the tuition for private programs. Because they cannot provide or obtain transportation to attend the programs that are nearest to them. Or because the appropriate programs simply do not exist in their communities. However, if these parents are given honest information about what residential and community alternatives exist, and the time to reflect about those things, most of them come to realize that the placement in most institutions means placing a lid on the child's potential by consigning them to custodial care. Some attention has been given to the specific negative effects on children of being consigned to live in these institutions. Research suggests following things. Unless the child comes from an extremely deprived home environment, institutionalization has a negative effect on intelligence. Institutionalized children develop personality disorders. A great percentage of individuals who are discharged from institutions fail to remain in the community because they lack the skills required for coping with the normal demands of everyday life. This is 1975. Having adapted to institutional life, they have become maladapted to the world outside. And looking at the recommendations this group came up with, institutionalization, the once attractive solution to helping many children, has become a problem in itself. Most of our large congregate institutions for children are unwholesome, uneconomic, self-defeating operations that should be abandoned as quickly as sensible alternatives can be provided. They are available now these alternatives. We need the professional knowledge and talent to run good programs for children in the community. There are many good examples that will show us the way. What is needed are leaders who care enough to insist that available knowledge and talent be employed in the interest of children. Recommendation: the large, congregate residential institutions for children of all categories, retarded, delinquent, emotionally disturbed, dependent, blind, and so on, should be closed, and the children cared for in community-based programs. 1975, 10 federal agencies, 95 contributors. We have a lot to learn from the work of people in our past. We talk about growing on the shoulders of giants. We can only do that if we pay attention to what the giants have said and we have knowledge of that. That wasn't what I was asked to talk about. I was asked to talk about 50th versus present, and that's what I'm going to talk about now. This all goes back to the early 1960s, definitely predating the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. In the early 1960s, Racewood, the one institution in Georgia that focused on folks with intellectual disabilities, was seriously overcrowded. So there were activities going on here in Georgia and a parallel set of activities happening in Washington. John F. Kennedy had a sister who had an intellectual disability, who unfortunately had some really negative things happen to her in her life. But he and his family were very aware that services just were not there for children with intellectual disabilities at that period of time. So we had a group working in Atlanta, really trying to focus on the fact that Atlanta needed a big institution. They were talking about a 1,000-bed institution. A gentleman by the name of James Clements, who was big nationally in disability research, led the effort to try and create a large institution in Atlanta. And at the same time, the federal government was allocating funds for the construction of facilities to serve children with intellectual disabilities and to train university students to work with those children. Those two things came together in Georgia for an application that was submitted for what in those days was known as a university-affiliated facility. And one of the requirements was it had to be university-affiliated, which means you needed some university affiliation. So the folks in Atlanta and state government, Jim Clements and others, worked with Emory, who said, we really are not in a position to take this on. They worked with Georgia State, who said, we can take a part in this, but we're not going to be a leader in doing this. They worked with Atlanta University, with the Theological Seminary, and with the University of Georgia. The problem with UGA is we're not in Atlanta. But this was the institution that was really interested in doing this. 10 academic departments bought into it, and they said, well, gosh, maybe the solution is this. We'll do our big to-do in Atlanta and put a little piece over in Athens that can be associated with the University of Georgia. And that's exactly what happened. Grant was funded that funded what in the past was known as the Georgia Retardation Center. It was located in DeKalb County, Chambly, and there was this little bitty satellite that was located in Athens, and it was called the Athens unit of the Georgia Retardation Center. It is out on College Station Road. It's now called Rivers Crossing. Federal money built a good part of what was happening on the Georgia Retardation Chambly campus, and it built the building out on College Station Road. We, as a university, were outliers even at that point in time because the focus was not on institutional placement for kids. You have to sort of remember the context. There was an important public law that got passed, 94-142, that meant that all kids had the right to go to school. But we're talking before that law existed. And in Georgia, like in the vast majority of other states, families of children would take their kids and they would get them all dressed up and they'd go to register for school and they'd appear at the door of the school and the school would say, I'm sorry, we don't serve children like yours. We do not educate kids like yours. And parents had no recourse. The schools could say no. And schools did say no. In Georgia, a lot of the training centers, which they were then called, provided programs for children down through infants and little kids. Parents groups, the art groups got together, Easter Seals provided programs, but the schools did not. So what UGA decided to do in its facility was to create a short-term residential facility where kids could come and people who had a lot of professional expertise could work with those kids, send them to their home communities with a lot of information and plans and technical assistance to be able to go there and to go to their own schools. Which was a wonderful idea, except that the schools didn't want the kids to start with. They didn't necessarily want them with a whole lot of information either. So it never quite worked out that way. But the programs were such that the building closed Friday afternoons. Everybody had a family or home to go home to. Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, folks came back, and 40 children were there during the day. During the height of the population of GIC Athens, there were 100 children going to school there. 40 lived there, and 60 came in as day students. They didn't have other options for education. I arrived in the late 70s, and we won't talk about how many years that was ago, but I did arrive in the late 70s. And I came here from Peabody in Nashville, and had the pleasure of getting to know people like Nick Hobbs and folks who were working in the institution movement. I worked with Bill and Diane Bricker, who created one of the first national programs for children with disabilities in inclusive preschool and early intervention programs. So I came here as a young, fresh person with a certain headset, and had a hard time wrapping my head around what I was finding in Georgia and at the University of Georgia. I came as what was known then as a Child and Family Development Area Rep, and I represented one of the academic departments on campus at GIC Athens. My job was to supervise 5 classrooms of children, 2 preschools, a primary and intermediate and adolescent classrooms. All were on the ground floor of the Rivers Crossing building at that point in time. And we had the kids who had the terrible label of being trainable. The kids on the first floor of the building had a somewhat bad label, but not much, of being educable. And the big difference was the kids who were educable could have a curriculum that focused on things like reading, writing, and arithmetic. And the kids that were in my program couldn't. And interestingly enough, at that point in time, the College of Education here primarily trained students to teach kids who were educable. And there was a little bit of emphasis, but very little, on kids who were not kids who were needing to be learning to read. But the program that did was in Family and Consumer Sciences, which is then known as the College of Home Economics. So I got hired in as a home ec person. My degree was in psychology. I could not believe I was entering a college of home ec. I'd never taken a home ec course in my life, and unfortunately had some very negative stereotypes of what that was all about. But what these programs did was to focus on a number of important skills. Skills like self-help and language and daily living skills and vocational skills, all of which were things that Child and Family Development saw as critical. We had all of the youngsters, regardless of how old they were or how confident they were, who had Down syndrome, because it was generally determined by folks on campus that if you had Downs, you really didn't need to be reading. So you automatically went down to the ground floor in terms of programs. We had a lot of academic disciplines who worked with programs. We were very frustrated because we had a hard time getting kids out of the building. We had some good times. It wasn't a wonderful model, but given that kids couldn't go to school in their local communities, for a lot of families, they were very pleased. But things started to change. 94-142 happened in the mid-70s. And schools started to develop their own programs. Some rural counties kept busing their kids to Rivers Crossing because they really didn't want to develop their own programs, but over time they did. So the need for what the building was first set up for really changed. And a lot of people say, well, originally Rivers Crossing was an institution. No, actually it wasn't. It went for an extended period of time before it turned into an institution in 1980. And what happened in 1980 was to keep the building viable, it became what's known as an ICFMR, basically an intermediate care facility for folks with mental retardation. That brought Medicaid funding, and it made huge changes, even though people said it wouldn't. And we talk about advocacy successes. This was a failure of advocacy. A number of us were vehemently opposed to that program turning into an institution for children. But those of us opposed at the university basically had no standing. And I personally watched what happens when a program goes through those changes and the financial incentives are for children to stay there on the weekends, to not be away for a day, where families become much less important. That learning is important today with some of the issues that we are grappling with. A lot of parallel things were going on at that period of time. There was the first inclusive set of preschool programs when we moved children out of Rivers Crossing and moved them into the Fall Center, which was the program here on campus for typically developing kids. And we closed the segregated preschool programs that had been at Rivers Crossing. And by the way, the whole thing with Rivers Crossing happened in 1991, where some folks, we had apparently 1 or 2 pages of Wolf Wolfensberger's work on normalization, and decided that they needed to change the name of GRC Athens to Rivers Crossing in the name of normalization. Nothing else changed, but they changed the name. And GRC in Atlanta became Brook Run. So we have these 2 sort of bubbly river-based names that got applied to 2 places. And Wolf would just be turning over if he really understood how this work helped us change the names and nothing else. The first predecessor of Parent to Parent happened here in the early 80s with a group called Parent Helpers that emerged out of this program that provided peer support for families who just learned they had a disability. Sam Nunn heard about that and disseminated it widely through the military. We had Mark Gold working in South Georgia and also working here in Athens, and his outfit, his group was located in the Rivers Crossing building and did phenomenal work relating to closing down shelters workshops and putting people to work. We also had a lot of work around technical assistance and a TAC team that went through various names as to what TAC stood for, that did technical assistance all over the state around behavior supports, around employment, and around programming for folks. So we have a lot of things that we could be very proud of in terms of what has happened with Rivers Crossing. I'm not going to go into the recent history, which I'm actually very proud of as well, but it doesn't sort of fit with the disability history presentation. In 1996, Rivers Crossing, the part of the program that was an institution, closed. It was the first institution in Georgia to close, and with the help of Beverly Aldine, who's in the room here, and some other folks, we followed for about 12 years every person who moved out of Rivers Crossing into the community, and were able to document tremendous changes in people's quality of life. And Rivers Crossing was a good institution as far as institutions go. There's no good institution, but as far as competent staff, well-trained staff, this was a very, very good program. But when people moved to the community, lots of good things happened. And Sally Carter, which many of you know, was able, through her magic, to convince all but 2 families of the folks at Rivers Crossing to try community instead of moving to another institution, which in those days was just a remarkable thing to have happen. And the people who moved to the community stayed there and had thriving lives. So a lot of good things have happened. A lot of learning has happened. A lot of things that we did wrong, that we should have done differently. Someday I'm going to pay for the fact that when I first got out of school, I gave kids IQ assessments down in New Orleans and basically put a whole lot of kids in special ed. I think I'm going to have some sort of retribution paid off I'm going to have to do for all those kids who are going to come back. Beth Mount did her dissertation here. And a lot of work around person-centered planning spawned from this campus. There is an iconic image of a gentleman by the name of David Bliss climbing up the steps of the academic building because the university, in its great wisdom in the 1880s, right, the 1980s, it seems like it would be the 1880s, started disability resources here on campus and started a center and then put it on the second floor of a non-accessible building. So we have this wonderful image of him climbing up the building, the stairs to the building, and it was almost immediately changed. And I want to be specific, it was not the people in the resource center who made that decision. This was an administrative decision. Most recently, we've had a protest around the UGA Arch, and you'll notice there's a new walkway that folks were not able to figure out how to get people through the arch, but were able to do a lot in terms of access. All of these things build on each other. And sort of going back to Rome and the multiple levels of civilization, to me, this is a tremendously exciting endeavor. It allows us to have a place in those vaults where long time from now, people are going to be able to understand and know what we learned, what we did wrong, what we did right, and hopefully be able to use that as that foundation as they build and as this country winds up having civilizations on top of civilizations. It's a very exciting day. Thank you.
Say good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We changed up a little. In the welcome, we should have given you the hashtag. Nobody's laughing. There is actually a hashtag, right, Matt?
There is, yes.
And what do you want to use?
Hashtag GDHS 2015.
Y'all get that? It's Georgia This Way History Symposium 2015. So GHDS 2015, right? No, GDHS 2015. Thank you. And I know some people are back there going to hashtag do a little bit of tweeting for me because we want to document this today. Obviously there's some photographers in the area. Obviously we have a videographer. This morning, we spent 2 hours with Tom Olin in the oral history booth back here. So there's some things going on to document not just the past, but the present that hopefully will inform the future. So let me just add my welcome. I want to do a shout out to the students. All the students that are here, raise your hand. I told them they were all Presbyterians because they're all sitting in the back row. But I'm glad I want to do a shout out to Tom. Some of you don't know, but he spent 23,000 miles, 33 states, and over 100 stops on the road from July 2014, where the ADA Legacy Tour kicks off in Houston, to it ending in DC this past July. Now he's still on the road, so that 23,000 now is probably about 25,000 miles on the road. So he has literally lived on that vehicle that you see out front here. So if we could all give a hand for Tom joining us. Tom's work is part of the collection here. Tom photographed actions here in '89, in '90, in '96, in 2009. He's been here for some other things. So some of his work is actually housed in that 3-story building underneath us called the Vogt, I guess, or does it have a nickname? The Vogt. So I really appreciate Tom being here. We didn't do the logistics, but if you have to go to the bathroom, you know where to go. Let me just this is the best way to kind of thank everybody. I want to thank everybody who had anything to do with this. So therefore, I did not leave anybody out, right? So let me just thank everybody who had anything to do with this, okay? I also want to ask just a question. Who in this room is currently part of this loosely formed network we call the Georgia Disability History Alliance? So look around the room and look at, these are the folks that a couple of years ago believed that today would happen. And there's no way to think about it other than there have been numerous attempts, at least 3 that I can think of, right, Eleanor, to kind of get where we are today. And we failed a couple of times. And that's okay, because we are here today, you know, celebrating the fact that we're here today. And that out there in those hallways, in those display cases, and back further in the room in those display cases, are the beginning of something that I think is very exciting. And so a special thanks to the folks here at UGA, Sheryl and Zoe, because you have world-class infrastructure here in place taking this on. This is not in Mark Johnson's basement, which is where it was for a while. And my wife was so happy that we could get rid of that crap, that stuff. And Carol Jones back here is real happy because she probably spent about 6 months sorting through it and packing it so we could get it out of that basement. Plus I live in an apartment now, so it doesn't matter. How many of you, it's our first visit here? First visit here. It's got a good feel to it, doesn't it? It's a classy place, isn't it? It's the kind of place that ought to be housing the kind of content that we're talking about today and that is out there today and that is down there in the ball. How many of you, first time you've seen the bus? Wow, that's good. That's actually good. I hope you selfie with it. I hope you put it on your Facebook page. I hope you let the world know that, contrary to popular belief, when we thought it had died in 2007 because it was stuck in storage for about 6 years, it is back on the road thanks to people like Tom and some of the folks in this room who have spent time finding money, or people like Carol and her husband who helped drive it, or. So a lot of people here who helped get that thing back on the road. There's also actually a Disability Rights Museum on wheels. It's a 48-foot trailer hauled behind a pickup truck that is actually on the road as well. It's one of those you actually go in. A lot of people want to know if they can go in this down here, and only if you want to have dinner with Tom or wash his clothes or see how he lives, because it's an RV and he lives in it. How many of you have actually donated something? I want y'all to look around the room at the people that donated stuff. You know, Tom, Beth, Carol, and Pat Puckett, and I saw a hand over there. The Kissels, right? There are a number, but not enough, folks. Not enough. I mean, we keep telling Sheryl, we know there's a lot out there. Hint, hint, GAO. Josh. Front row guy, you get on the front row, you get picked on, okay? But my point is, we know that our narrative, our story, our history is very rich. And we know that in order for society not to repeat the bad things, right, Zoe? That sometimes it's important to know that even well-intended people did bad things to people. You know, and it's important to know that history so that we don't repeat the bad parts of it. I know all of you, it's really, hey, Friday afternoon at 1 o'clock in Athens, but that's a commitment. And I appreciate the commitment that all of you have made to be here. I hope you hang around till 5 so we can run out and do a group selfie, a group shot beside the bus. And I noticed that great little sign out on the steps, the perfect little icon for today's Twitter universe, meaning the logo. We can maybe get that out there and do a group shot at the end of the symposium and before the reception. So if you just kind of catalog in that head, try to hang around till 5. We'll make it as painless as possible out here to take a picture. Okay, now what I was supposed to talk about. We're gonna have a panel. As you noticed, there are probably 8 or 9 people around this room, and there's some people outside this room that have donated some content. And so we've asked for about 4 folks who have content to come up and talk about some of the stuff they've donated. talk a little bit about their story. And so if we could get everybody, those three people up at the table right now, that might be good. I think Tom from Savannah.
Mark, we're going to show the film first.
Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped too fast. Matt, come in and talk about the film.
All right.
Which is what you were supposed to do before I got up here anyway. Now, here, thank you.
Good afternoon. It's so wonderful to see you all here today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mat Darby. I'm an archivist with the Russell Library here at UGA in Special Collections. I'm also, for the past 2 years, been a curator of the Georgia Disability History Archive. The results of which some of the results of which you will be able to see in the exhibits out in the hallway and in our central gallery. And the thing I want to sort of say to you all is that the things that are in these cases are just the tips of the various icebergs that we have. That there is so much more information in these archives that have yet to be discovered, analyzed, and used in a variety of ways. The thing I want to talk about right now is something that I didn't know it at the time, but it's something that became sort of special to me in working with Laura Kissel, who is the daughter of Mary Kissel and her husband David. She was a filmmaker and I guess went to Ithaca College in the late 90s. And when I was working with Mary to see what she may have had in terms of donating to the archive, one of the things I found it was really the bottom of the box, and it said, just very simply on the label, it said "Campaign for Full Citizenship," and that was a very provocative title. And I, asked Mary about it. She said, "Well, I think that might be my daughter Laura's student film. I've maybe seen it once or twice, but haven't seen it in years. It was originally done in 1991." And so I brought it back here to the Russell Library, and we have a media studio that we could take that, now seemingly ancient VHS tape, plug it into a VCR and take a look at it. And at only about 15 minutes long, what I saw was, in a lot of ways, some of the earliest work that the disability rights movement was doing here in Georgia. I'm not going to say a whole lot about it. Laura Kissel has done amazing work in taking that, frankly, unwatchable VHS tape and created a very good digital file for us to screen today. And she provided some comments that she wanted me to read prior to the screening of the film, and her complete comments are on a sheet that you'll find out at the desk outside the door. But so this is Laura's introduction to the film. This is a film that I forgot I made. I produced this film when I was 21 years old and a senior at Ithaca College studying documentary filmmaking. In this sense, it is an orphan film. It's a student or amateur film that has resided in a box unwatched for the past 25 years. I have a lot of emotions and thoughts about this film, but I'll try to be brief. First, it doesn't seem possible that I've been around long enough for this film to become a significant historical document. And you'll see what she means when you see the faces and the actions that are presented in the film. Campaign for Full Citizenship, which is the name of the film, makes visible the efforts of many people in the state of Georgia during the early 1990s who were doing the hard grassroots work of ensuring civil rights for all of Georgia's citizens with disabilities. The scene of the protest at the Atlanta Healthcare Finance Administration building demonstrates the movement's commitment, solidarity, and creativity. Who is the person inside the cage? I love that shot. It's a little dark, but maybe some of you here can identify him or her. Pat Puckett and Mark Johnson also play prominent roles, and I hope they are here today to see the film. There is also the work of my mother, Mary, in the film. She is one of the founders of Georgia Options, and you can hear her vision and leadership through the film's narration. Her language challenges the film's viewers to understand human disability differently, in a way that emphasizes people first and not disability. This is still radical. This is still radical thinking. There is so much work to be done even now. She is strongly articulate and still leading the way. Finally, Campaign for Full Citizenship is also a home movie because it shows my family together. We just lost my brother Eric 3 years ago. I can see him in the film looking very happy and engaged in life. His happiness is in part due to my parents and what they believed about his abilities and the contributions he could make. The film shows Eric in action, doing so many things. It documents the life he was able to build through the friendship and support of many people. And she ends, thank you for including this film in the Georgia Disability History Symposium. Feel free to follow up with me to share your comments and thoughts about Campaign for Full Citizenship. And like I said, there's some contact information and some other remarks that she's provided on the table right outside the door. But I certainly hope that you enjoy the film as much as I have. Thank you.
To do anything with this time?
We'll get you.
Because I don't think I was on last time, right? Might because operator issue. Much better.
Just don't say anything you don't want anybody to hear.
Yeah. Whoa.
Hold on, let me get you.
Man, that makes me feel really old. Whoa.
Mark, who was in the cage? Was that Shayla Jackson?
Do I now?
Who was in the cage? Was that Shayla Jackson? Could you
I
tell?
don't know. I was so caught up in the moment. Ooh, details. Wow. Well, guess what? That campaign continues. That's all. It's not over yet. Kissels, would y'all stand up for a second? Mary and options exist today. So it wasn't just a dream, it exists today. And it supports how many folks today? About 30 or so folks right here in this community. So Georgia has this incredible, I don't know what I called it one time, it's irony, it's a contradiction, it's whatever. But the fact is most of what's been done in Georgia is because of individuals and families and groups of individuals and families. And I think that's a thread you're going to hear. You know, we may or may not have well-intended leadership in the past. We may even have leadership in the past, but it seems like everything really comes from the roots and the people and the families. You know, just the place I work is a classic example. 40th anniversary of Shepherd Center. It was started by one person and one family. Now, granted, well-connected person and family, but it shows you a lot where the power can be is in that story. And I think that's what we're going to kind of transition to. So Matt, I'm sorry I jumped ahead of time, but they can always edit that, okay? So yeah, 4 of the folks that donated stuff are going to present now. And I think I'll try to cut mine a little short because I think we're kind of running up on time a little bit, aren't we? Are we doing pretty good?
You're okay.
We're okay? Okay, and if you notice when at the end of the 5 o'clock hour, we do our photos, and maybe you come up here and drill down on some of the displays out here, you'll notice little placards that have the name of the person who donated this stuff. And so, if you think about it, back to what Matt said, this was in the bottom of a box. It's still relevant today, don't you think? And wouldn't you like to just lock a few decision makers in a room and say you can't leave, I'll serve you popcorn, I'll do whatever, but you have to sit here for what, a walloping 15 minutes and watch this and tell me whether you're proud of where we've come in 24 years. And we all know that it's taken additional litigation, and we all know, Josh, right, that our own state did not fulfill its obligations under the settlement. Is that true? And so, we'll just see how things progress over the next couple of years. That'll be real interesting. So, if 4 speakers come up now, Tom and Eleanor and Shelly. I thought I saw Shelly here earlier. There she is. And I know Pat is kind of sharing that with Shelly. Some of you might not know, but we got birthdays in the room and we got retirement parties in the room. So you'll learn a little bit about that. I think I'm supposed to start, and I'm just going to kind of quickly go over a couple stories, and then we'll just go right down the line here. Tom, Savannah, and Eleanor, and Atlanta, and Shelly with the Statewide Independent Living Council. But I wasn't here in the 70s, though. I didn't move here until 1986, and I didn't have a job in 1986, and I went around to some traditional display rights groups, Beth, not your Easter Seals, by the way, and Easter Seals. And I went around saying, hey, I'm this guy that I think I'm a pretty good advocate, I think I'm a pretty good community organizer. Would you be interested in hiring me? And let's just say that didn't go anywhere, because it did go anywhere. So I volunteered at what was then the only independent living center in the state of Georgia, called the Atlanta Center for Independent Living. And it was run by the state. And it was, of all locations, it was interesting. It was in the basement of a Baptist church, right? And I was up in Alpharetta, Roswell, and they were down here off I-20 near Eleanor's old house. And I used to commute back and forth. And I kind of said, hey, if I can help out here, I'd like to help out here. And then one day I asked, hey, the commute's kind of a grind, and the commute's costing me a little bit of money, and what do you think about paying for the gas? And they looked at me kind of funny and basically said no. So I did a little research and said, you know what? I don't like the way independent living is structured in the state of Georgia. And I think that center needs to belong to the people, not the state. And through a series of events by a lot of people and a lot of groups, ultimately that model was broken up. And you'll hear more about that later. But that was my introduction to Georgia. The other introduction was, Tom mentioned in his oral history that back in the day when organizations were relevant, a lot of their relevancy was based on the fact that they had publications. And you couldn't wait until you got your magazine so you could read about XYZ. And so the Display Rag and Mouth Magazine, and to some extent Mainstream Magazine, were your go-to sources, right? You couldn't wait till you got them to read about what was going on around the country or things. And so I subscribed to a magazine called the Display Rag, done by a woman named Mary Johnson, and she's still in Kentucky. And those magazines covered the movement in a whole different way than any other publications. And so when I moved to Georgia, I thought, well, I'm going to call Mary up and get the list of everybody who subscribes to that magazine, and I'm going to say, hey, because I knew they'd covered ADAPT, so I knew they might know about ADAPT. And so I started going around the state. My wife gave me a lot of flexibility my first 9 months. And I went around and I stayed with people in Savannah. Judy and Judy, yeah. Stayed with folks, and they actually took me out to Tybee. It was my birthday, and I got a birthday cake. And I went to just run around the state meeting people, kind of say, hey, I don't want to assume things aren't being done here. I don't want to assume people aren't doing them the way that maybe I learned in Colorado and North Carolina. So I had the luxury of going around meeting people and learning about people and finding out maybe where I could add value to advocacy. I mean, if you look at the whole thing here, stories of advocacy and action. And so after that trip, I came back and said, makes sense to start an ADAPT. And so I got that subscription list, and I wrote out a note, and I said, hey, I'm in town, and I'm trying to raise a couple bucks. This is summer of '86, to send some folks from Atlanta to an ADAPT action in Detroit. And Eleanor Smith down here was the first person to send me money, sight unseen. And Bernard Baker, who you saw here, African American, that was leading a lot of the chants, was the first person I met who said, public transit is something I have to have access to, and I'm willing to do anything about it. And of course, contrary to me, Bernard could get out of his chair and crawl up things. Me, I could just sit in front of the bus, but Bernard could get out and crawl up steps and stuff. So that was my beginning, and we started a campaign with Marta to say, hey, the law didn't require it, but we wanted every new bus that was purchased to have a lift on. We started that campaign shortly after that Detroit trip, and by May of 1987, MARTA passed a policy to put lift on every new bus. And does that mean the technology evolved yet? Does that mean drivers were comfortable using it? Does that mean there were bus shelters that were accessible you could wait at? No. But it meant we finally had a policy that said every new bus bought would have a lift on it. And so I give a lot of people like Bernard credit for that because, hey, I had a van. But the power was in Bernard and folks who, that's the only way to get from point A to point B. And so some of that is out there. I noticed Matt put some of that in displays cases. One of my first letters to the MARTA board offering, hey, I come from this town, and hey, lifts on buses were a rarity in Denver, and hey, I'd be happy to work with folks about making that happen. Well, long story. It's in the archives here of that 10-month campaign. I then came along and that May, we had a rally down at MARTA, and originally we thought maybe we weren't going to win the vote, but we won the vote in committee the week before. And so we knew we were going to win the vote direction. So I'm over there now volunteering as a peer supporter at Shepherd Center, and their recreation department made it an outing, and they brought all these newly injured people to this rally at MARTA. Leg bags and all, collars, posters around their neck and all that. And the fact is, we knew we were going to win, so it turned into a victory rally. But guess who was there? Eleanor Smith. And so that little contribution led to a personal meeting, and she's going to talk to you a little more about concrete change. So we went from an ADAPT to concrete change, and then we had this bright idea. There was nobody out there that wanted to be our fiscal sponsor. So, damn, we got to create a nonprofit now because we're having money go to Denver, and Denver sent it back to us. So we created this thing called Let's Get Together. And it was like an umbrella for ADAPT and concrete change, and ultimately some other entities. And so let me just kind of 88, the reference to the UGA protest. They heard about some of the stuff going on in Atlanta. Students called me up and said, hey, we understand maybe you can help us here. And I said, well, first of all, is there a Section 504 transition plan at the university? And they said, we'll find out. They found it, and it was about an inch of dust in it. And I said, well, clearly then, they did their self-assessment, but there obviously is an implementation of it. The first thing you need to do is demand a meeting with the administration. Well, that didn't happen. And then it became obvious. I said, well, by the way, do you have a disability student service office? Yeah. I said, well, where is it? Second floor of the building in New Orleans. I said, well, I guess they don't want me to work there. You know, at that time it's that paternalism of, we're here for you and we'll come down to you. But by God, nobody ever thought about the fact that one of them might want to work with us. I'm using those words on purpose. So bottom line is, I came up here and we did this little session with the students. I said, listen, I'm not a student. It makes no sense for me to get out there and go, right? But I have an idea. I said, can anybody here get out of their chair? Are you willing to put your demands down in writing? And that picture is a really neat picture because if you notice in David's mouth, there's like a scroll. Because what it was a list of their demands. And it was great because the next day it was front page, Journal-Constitution. And then it was temporary location until the students had some say-so about where it would be in the future. And then what I love recently is what you referenced, meaning the new wave, the new ADA generation, the folks that are born or acquired their disability after ADA have taken the next step and said an annual tradition at UGA is to go through the arts. You know, back then we're thinking simple stuff like, hey, can I get around campus? You know? Or as one of the students said yesterday, what do they call it? An urban cliff, which is another name for a curb cut. So that was 88. And 88, some of you might remember, the Democratic National Convention came to Atlanta. Hey, I'm an independent. I was just excited the convention was coming to town. And we knew that eventually the DNC would cave because they held the convention in the old Phillips Arena. And some of you might not remember, but it was old Phillips Arena. And there was one section in the arena where people with disabilities, mobility, folks that use chairs could sit. One section. And so you're holding a convention there. So how are people with disabilities going to sit with their delegation? I didn't have to ask the questions because I had colleagues around the country with disabilities that were delegates that were coming and saying, by the way, I will be sitting with my delegation, right? Well, they came up with this, idea that somehow they were going to technology connect people with their delegation, but they really wouldn't be with them. Long story short, they contracted myself and Kate Gaynor 2 months before the convention to try to make that look better. And of course, then we went around and asked questions, well, who do you get advice from? Max Cleland, great man, would never, challenge what he brought to this state, what he's accomplished personally. But the fact is, as soon as they said Max, I knew we needed to go around and recheck everything for access. Part of it was because, the Rhodes building downtown Atlanta, the old kind of small castle there at Peachtree and Spring or West Peachtree. He had told him it was accessible. Well, it's accessible because he was in a manual chair and you had a hired person that could haul him up in there. So Kate and I did this survey around and we said, went to the DNC leadership and said, this is not going to be pretty. Down to the point to where, remember the famous Jesse Jackson speech on that convention? It was the first time Jesse did a live, main time speech. And we went to him right before, well, it was people first and then him, and said, listen, we want to disrupt right before your speech to bring attention to the fact that the DNC did not take access into consideration for this convention. Great, glad you brought to Atlanta, but if you brought to Atlanta because of access, wrong reason. Long story short, he said, what have you got to do? And as soon as the DNC leadership heard that, they came. And we had a press conference the next day saying that the DNC would use access as a major criteria, like any other major criteria, meaning transportation, hotel rooms, this, that, and the other, going forward. And some of that content is right here in all that stuff that was in my basement. So 86, 87, 88, we've had 4 major national protests here. The 89 one, which was really the last major transportation protest. We were talking about it with Tom's oral history today. We took over, of all things, the Richard Russell Federal Building on 75 Spring Street. Took it over, people were being dragged out. You reminded me, I forgot the one woman they put her on a cart and pull her out because she was pretty big, and she wouldn't voluntarily leave, so they had to put her up on a 4-wheel cart, start bottom line in, and let it back in. We spent the night there. And the next morning, we negotiated the wording that was in ADA around transportation. You know, and 89 or 90, that was 1990, right up here. Your daughter going, all these people coming, and why are they coming? And we kicked off that campaign that year in 1990, and it continues today. Because unfortunately, we still have an institutional bias in this state. Some of you remember around that same time, I know Pat does, Larry McAfee, you know, graduate of Georgia Tech, was living in the community, was starting to pursue, you know, a job and a career. Insurance cap ran out. He got on Medicaid, became the property of the state. The state started shipping him around from facility to facility, and the only thing Larry thought he had control over more was whether he lived or died. And he designed it was called, ultimately made a movie, The Switch, but what he needed was somebody to engage the switch. You know, and I'm generalizing some of, there was another woman in Jenny Lynn Langley. You know, at the same time, Jenny had been injured once, come to Shepherd Rehab, got injured a second time, was in on an event like Larry. Who's 2 guys, Robert and whoever up in Grady? Charlie lived in Grady for years, you know, because nobody was going. There was no place, no support system. So ultimately that became, you know, a whole campaign that could be talked about a little later too. It was not dead yet. Ultimately, you know, independent care waiver was created around that. Then I think it was 95, I think Shelly's going to talk some about that. When the SIL came along, we had more than one independent living center that was consumer run, consumer controlled. Some of you remember 96, the Paralympic Games. You know, the Olympics and the Paralympics came here. What you might not remember is that the dome, $200+ million dome was built. And they were very proud of that dome. And there was then a Roam the Dome Day where you paid $1 and you could go anywhere in the dome. It was probably the first time or only time you would ever see some of the suites that some of these people had. But you could go anywhere in the dome. And they were real proud to have, you know, these great parking places and universal heights and the ticket counters. And you could go get your hot dog in the universal heights for mustard and ketchup, and they had unisex bathrooms. And they had dispersed seating, so it wasn't like Phillips Arena, you know, it was dispersed seating. And it was all this great stuff. And so some of us are sitting in the main section there where the food is. And back then we were pretending like Deion Sanders intercepts the ball on the 50 and he goes to the 40 and the 30. And the person stood up in front of me and I saw their butt. So here was this $200 million brand new facility with no sight line. And people stood up in front. 15 complaints later, Department of Justice moved to Atlanta for 2 years to oversee all the construction of all the Olympic and Paralympic venues. Right? No lawsuits, but good complaints. Got enough of their attention to bring down here. Pat knows, you know, when Blue Cross Blue Shield went from nonprofit to for-profit, and they wanted to take those assets and give them to the shareholders, and we said, whoa, you know, and so the disability community was front and center in that lawsuit that ultimately got settled that created Healthcare Georgia Foundation. the first Disability Day in 1998, 17 years ago. There were 50, maybe 50 if we embellished. Oh, by the way, I'm Mark from Atlanta, and I'm Mark from Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm Mark from Denver, Colorado. There were 3 you know, I just moved around a lot, and reintroduced myself. And we held it inside the state capitol. 3,000 people pre-registered this last year for Disability Day. Now, I can go on about whether there's value, who it benefits, does it change anything, or whatever. What I'm trying to say is it's a story about advocacy and action. Some of you know about 1998, a couple people with brain injury said, hey, this folks in Alabama, when you get a DUI, a percentage of that fine collected goes to a fund to help, renovate your house or help renovate your vehicle or. And so that campaign was led by people with brain injuries and with the support of places like Shepherd and whatnot, and created the Georgia Brain and Spinal Injury Trust Fund. Problems with it today? Yeah. Does it help some people today? Yeah. It's kind of like ICWP. Does it help some people today? Yeah. Is it what it was? I don't know. 1999. You're going to hear about it later. Right, Sue? Olmstead decision. I couldn't find the date for unlock the waiting list, but it was somewhere in that 99-ish scenario. Wasn't it?
Before 90.
Was it?
It was before
The
90.
first one? Because Beth Tumlin took me out to Texas or somewhere near an airport, and we sat through a presentation about how to start unlock the waiting list. 2000, Spirit of the ADA, the 10th anniversary of ADA, and the torch relay. The Long Road Home, a 4-day march, walk, rally. People actually followed my car for 4 days. And if you survive that, actually if you're riding it and you survive it, that's a story to tell your family anyway. And then more recently, the 25th anniversary of ADA. ADA 25 was born in Atlanta on August of 2013. So those are just, I'm just touching on a lot of, and generalizing a lot, but all that content now is right here, or at least what I have of it, and I know people have a lot more. So there truly are a lot of stories of advocacy and action, and I've been blessed to be part of that and meet a lot of good people and do a lot of good things. And let me turn it over to Tom now.
God, that was great. Thank you. I mean, a lot to think about there, and a lot of tears on the streets too. So thank you. Let me see. I want to start just by saying that I was asked to talk a little bit about sort of how I personally got involved, which I'll talk about very briefly, and then try to move from there a little bit. Just to say that I got involved in all this by accident. And I was a member of a congregation, Big Cathedral Temple in Savannah, Georgia. I was a member of the Temple Youth Group. And we were asked to go and visit a youngster and maybe try to help out with some physical therapy. This would have been in 1968, maybe. And a couple of us went out to this house, the family's home, and met Tommy Broussard and met his family. And a couple of us went one day a week for about 2 years and helped do this physical therapy pattern. It's called Dom and Delicato. And the idea was that somehow you could teach a 9-year-old boy who wasn't walking how to walk by putting him on the kitchen table and making him look like he was swimming. But it took 4 people to do the physical therapy pattern, and it took 8 people because you had to do it 2 times a day. And so I did that for a couple of years, and that's kind of how I stepped into all this. In hindsight, a couple of things to point out. One is that Mrs. Broussard was raising 3 children, and so she was pretty busy. She also had to have 8 people a day come to her house to help out. And that was 8 people a day, 360 days a year, because to agree to this program, you had to agree to the ground rules out of the University of Pennsylvania, and those were the ground rules. So think about the number of people who had to step forward to be present to do this, 8 people a day, 360 days a year. Well, in hindsight, I realized that Mrs. Broussard had a volunteer recruiter. And her volunteer recruiter was her next door neighbor named Louise Wilkins. Ms. Wilkins worked as the secretary for Joel Williams, who was the legal counsel for Savannah Foods, which was the biggest company in Chatham County. And as the legal representative for Savannah Foods, he spent most of his time in Washington lobbying for the sugar subsidies. So while he was away in Washington lobbying for the sugar subsidies, Louise Wilkins was on the phone drumming up 8 volunteers a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. About 30 years after that, I happened to be in a situation where I was with the retired president of the company. And I said to Billy Sprague, I said, Mr. Sprague, you probably don't know this. And I kind of told him the story about how Louise Wilkins had spent a lot of her time recruiting volunteers while he paid her salary. And Mr. Sprague kind of politely listened and said, I'm glad we could be of help. So that's kind of how I got started in this. And then when I went to college, I studied, and instead of cutting grass, I got to work at what was called the Chatham Association for Retarded Citizens. And I got to work in what was called the Profound Room. And the Profound Room was the storage room of the shelter workshop. And there were 7 rocking chairs and 2 teachers and 7 people. And that was the Profound Room. And that would have been 1970. And then I stopped out at Armstrong, and I went to work at the Association for Retarded Citizens, the use of language of the day. And I taught, and I made $4,200 a year as a teacher, and didn't have a degree. But back in that day, there were no curriculums, so it was pretty straightforward. You just figured out what you wanted to try to do, and you kind of did it. The ARC had, of course, come from the parent movement of the 50s. Little May Kicklighter started the Kicklighter School, and then later in the 70s, Title 19 money had dropped down, and things had gotten bigger, and Georgia Association for Retarded Citizens, the source of lobbying, the training center movement, all that. But I mean, it all started from that little parent movement. You know, Mrs. Kicklighter was interesting because I asked Mrs. Kicklighter, she and I, I was young and I really thought I was smart then. And we had our differences, but I remember asking her once about why she started school, and she said that, well, the day that she knew that her life was going to be really different was when a school bus came and picked up Billy, who her son Bobby had played with in the street. But the school bus wouldn't pick up her son Bobby. And that was the day that she knew her life was going to be different, and that's the day she started school. Decided to start school, and so she didn't want to start some kind of little separate school. If folks had said, come on, that would have been it. There's also a great picture that I'll never forget of the first school, and they had primary school tables and primary chairs with adults sitting in these chairs. And so you've got adults sitting with their knees up under their chins, and these chairs are about 18 inches high. And you think, and I asked Ms. Kicklighter, I said, Ms. Kicklighter, tell me about this. She said, well, nobody had ever been to school or anything, and so we just felt we'd sort of start at the beginning. But again, the image of the community, the message was the message. So that's kind of how I sort of got into all this. And then one thing led to another, and Pat Puckett and I became 2 of the first MRSs in the States, and we were going to bring people back from the institutions. I lasted for that I did that for 6 months. I couldn't figure out how that was going to work because they had posted me at Georgia Regional Hospital. They had given me, my office was one entire day room that was not being used. I had a desk and telephone, but nobody to answer the telephone if I wasn't there. And so I was able to discern that the state's commitment to this idea was not quite what it was maybe needed to be, and I really wasn't going to be able to do this. So I was really thinking this might be it for me. And then a woman named Roberta Malavenda came from Savannah, from Atlanta, and she had this little idea about citizen advocacy, and that's kind of, what I've done for a really long time. I've been trying to think about this some, and I do want to just say that I'm going to suggest that, since we're talking about history, I'm going to suggest that for maybe over the past 150 years or so, we can take the history of whatever this thing called disability is and put it in 4 words, 150 years in 4 words. And I think those 4 words are from collecting to connecting. From collecting to connecting. If you look back in like 1850, the beginning of the institutional movement, up through the 1920s, 1930s, the eugenics movement, etc., collecting, collecting, collecting. And then you begin to think maybe, post-World War II, the baby boom kids, guys back from World War II, they had just saved the world from Nazism, and their wives were telling them that, we've got 3 children and one of them, get to go to school, what's up with that? And so that was the beginning of the parent movement, really. And parents, all they really wanted was a place for their children to be, because their children weren't welcome anywhere. And Lois Anthony, who's a parent, Savannah, talked to me about this recently. She said, when Lois and I walked out in the street, this would be in the 60s, when we walked around in the street, people looked at us like we had something on us. And so they just wanted a little place, that was all. But that was still, they knew they didn't want their children collected up in the big institution, but still, that was collecting, if you will. I'd say since the 1970s, there really has been a shift, and that shift has been to find ways to, rather than always collect people around this idea of disability into groups, to try to connect people to life in our communities. And this shift, you see this shift in lots of ways. I mean, you see it in terms of the way we've tried to shift public policy, we've tried to shift budgets, we've tried to shift the way, where people are physically present in our communities, to try to connect people, to be part of the good things that we all know. We all know what good things are in life, and to connect people to those good things. Now, this has happened at different paces in different states, and really in different cities and different states. You see it goes in different ways. But I would like to suggest maybe that the Georgia Advocacy Office, particularly with its original kind of single focus commitment on the idea of citizen advocacy, which started like in the mid-1970s, this idea of well-connected local citizens, that people could be invited to meet, get to know, and enter into solidarity with a person who'd spent their life sort of collected up and who'd been expected to live in Disabilityville. I would say that was an early and an important part of the shift from collecting people to connecting people. This is the mid-1970s. I'd also suggest that the Georgia Advocacy Office was one of the first organizations in the United States, certainly the first organization in the American South, to be created in the post-introduction of normalization era. When the normalization principles came to the United States, quite frankly, everything began to change. That was the light switch, was this notion that segregation definitionally was wrong and something different had to be done. And that was really those first past workshops where people in Georgia began to think about that in this way. Something's really wrong. We've got to do something. So the Georgia Advocacy Office, again, established after 1976, in 1976, 77, 78, really post-normalization. The principles with PALs, the principles, Tricia Powell, Betty O'Berry, John O'Brien, among many others, deeply influenced by and influencing these new ideas. And the organization had founding principles LES, that were deeply influenced by these normalization principles as well. Now, a constant source of frustration for those of us who went to these early past workshops, 1976, 77, if there are people here who did that, you might raise your hands. Yeah, sure, right. A real source of frustration for us is we go back to our organizations that we work for, and we would realize very quickly that change in our organizations was going to come very, 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 very slowly compared to the ideals that we had just been exposed to. And people like Marion Phillip J., Dottie Adams, Pat Puckett, Beth Mount, Doug Watson, many other people, Beth here, so I mean, many of us, that was kind of our situation. But the Georgia Advocacy Office was based on these new ideas. And so for me, that was a big jump, to jump somewhere where I didn't have to try to slog through all the old architecture of the past, but to jump into a place where we were starting fresh and trying to do something new. The Georgia Advocacy Office had to do a fair amount of creative reading of the enabling legislation and to try to do things in a new way. The legislation, the P&A legislation, 1975, proposed by Jacob Javits from New York, I think Willowbrook scandal, so you can think what he was thinking about, was intended to, quote, protect people with vulnerabilities from abuse while living in state institutions, nursing homes, and other facilities. Not a very high bar to shoot for, right? I remember someone saying that what the feds wanted to do was make sure that the bath water was not too hot and the food wasn't too cold. And that was really sort of the intent of that legislation. Not a very grand vision. So a lot of work had to be done by the framers and the creators of the Georgia Advocacy Office to take, the feds did generously give $70,000 to run a statewide network. And if you wanted to get your millions of dollars of institutional Medicaid money, you had to accept the $70,000 and the P&A mandate. So it wasn't like people were really excited about this at all. But one provision in the P&A mandate was that the organization would be freestanding and would stand free and clear of state government. And that one little provision was enough for John and Betty and Tricia to, I think, feel like, let's see if we can't stand on that little piece of turf and do something a little different. In 1976, the Atlanta Association for Retarded Citizens received a grant from the then Georgia Developmental Disabilities Council to plan the statewide P&A system. And it was during that time, 76 through 78, that Georgians began to spend a lot of time with Dr. Wolf Olsenberger. They traveled to his workshops. Wolf came to Georgia many times. John O'Brien, you remember, was traveling all over the world by that time, countries, learning and bringing ideas back. And this was pre-internet. We used carbon paper, but we could go places. People went places and learned a lot of things. The first PASS workshop was in Georgia in 1976, as I said. And that first round of people, mostly young people, bought into this idea that we had to stop collecting people up in groups. We had to begin to find new ways to connect people with disabilities to their fellow citizens and to the same lifestyles and opportunities that other Georgians enjoyed. And so that was kind of game on in my memory. The Georgia Advocacy Office opened on Peachtree Street. Tricia Powell, Betty O'Berry, Carol O'Hearn, Carol Bush. The guiding assumptions, it would be independent, offer a wide range of remedies, be for individual people rather than groups. The assumption was that most people did not really know people with disabilities, and until people knew one another better, the chances for systemic change would be flawed. There was the story of the Stacy Smith home, kindly old Mrs. Smith, who took in first 1, then 2, then 3, then 12 children with disabilities, then 24, and was stacking children in cribs on top of each other. That story. The Atlanta Association for Retarded Citizens came out against Mrs. Smith. They were roundly ostracized by the Atlanta media and lost a lot of funding. Again, an example that without communal understanding and belief that I am you and you are me and we are both human, the chances for systemic change was deeply flawed. Just to say that the Georgia Advocacy Office, again, in support of citizen advocacy, particularly in the early days, provided a lot of money in training and oversight. John McKnight's, who's been very influential in our field to help us think about community. John McKnight's first introduction to the whole idea of disability came through the Georgia Advocacy Office. John O'Brien had read an article he had written called Valuable Deficiencies that described the commoditization of people with disabilities. McKnight was going to speak with Ralph Nader in Minnesota the next month. And Betty O'Berry and I were sent to go meet McKnight and Ralph Nader, which was great. And then McKnight came to Georgia and traveled around, and that hooked him into becoming influential in the field of disability. Yvonne Illich, the dominant social critic of his era, then came to Georgia and spent a lot of time looking at citizen advocacy and this idea of individual people standing in solidarity with other individual people. David Snippet, who invented graphic facilitation, first chaired graphic facilitation at the Georgia Advocacy Office, and graphic facilitation, of course, led to a lot of the work around person-centered planning and futures planning, sort of helped support that. So many sort of innovations in terms of thinking, again, in this new way, I think, generated during that period of time. You know, as the years have rolled by in citizen advocacy, certainly, I think we can say safely that tens of thousands of Georgians have been invited to consider stepping into solidarity with another person. I'd like to think that this will never go out of style. I'd like to think that we'll never go out of style to invite people to stand closer to one another and be in solidarity with one another. A few thousand over the long arc of 35 years have said yes. Some lives have been saved. Many lives have been changed. Some patterns of service practice have been challenged. And I think communities have been challenged to live up to the dream of a beloved community. And a beloved community is not a utopia, but a place where the barriers between people gradually come down, and where people make a constant effort to address even the most difficult problems of ordinary people, is above all else an idealistic community. That's Reverend Jim Lawson, the teacher of the American Civil Rights Movement. And so I think in the long arc of history, I like to think that the contribution that citizen advocacy has made to the big picture is that we were early on realizing that it was time to stop collecting people, and it was time to start connecting people with one another into possibility. Thank you.
I think one of the things the Alliance continues to come to realization about is not just the power of the individual and families and what they've accomplished in spite of, but the other thing is how Georgia has created so many gifts for around the world. You know, and you're going to continue that story throughout the day of where some conversation led to some concept that led to something, you know, that in some ways takes shape, form, or fashion faster in other places than it does in the backyard where it was born. So that's a really good thought. Eleanor?
Let's see. Matt is going to be my slide guy. I decided to take 5 minutes for the organization not dead yet, and only 15 for concrete change. Is slide 1 not dead yet up there?
Good there.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Now it is.
Okay. The Not Dead Yet movement has a lighthearted name and a serious purpose. A number of colleagues here in the room today have looked directly on Not Dead Yet education and actions. We are in favor of supports for people with disabilities, young and old, and their families, rather than legal prescriptions from doctors for fatal medication. We are in favor of equal access to the prevention of suicide for people with disabilities, rather than singling out people with disabilities as a group to be offered suicide. The public is not generally aware of the disability rights perspective on assisted suicide, nor does the press usually present the disability rights point of view. Instead, the debate gets framed as the rational left wing in favor and center in favor of choice versus only religious and political conservatives against doctor-assisted suicide. But Not Dead Yet is made up of people with a wide range of political views, not only conservatives, but many politically center and many left-leaning people. When a non-disabled person is standing on a ledge, threatening to jump, the police rightly come in and grab that person from the ledge. When disabled people, elderly or young, want to die, often deprived of the resources they need for a decent quality of life, in some states we are offered assistance to die. Not Dead Yet members don't want to be forced to live on through procedure after procedure, forced against our will. However, in those situations, we could refuse medical treatment, and everyone has that option. But the Death with Dignity movement, the assisted suicide movement, blurs the distinction between the freedom to refuse medical treatment or even actively end our own lives and the freedom to have someone else legally end one's life, which endangers the lives of people who are valued less in society. Older and disabled people can be expensive to support. It's easy to select this population as the ones encouraged to die, rather than supporting us to live and making us feel welcome in the world. Some call this issue of assisted suicide a slippery slope, and indeed it is a slippery slope. Take the Netherlands, for example, one of the first countries to legalize doctor-assisted suicide. At first it was for people with terminal conditions. Then it was for people with a medical condition that was not terminal, such as multiple sclerosis or quadriplegia. And then it became available to people with psychiatric disabilities, severe depression, assisted suicide. And now it is available for something called tired of life. So yes, indeed, it is a slippery slope. But I also think of it as a threshold to a door. When one person steps over, it increases the likelihood that the next will step over, and then more, until it becomes the normal thing to do. Everybody knows that life can be hard sometimes. Help is needed to stay, not to go. Not Dead Yet has a national website, notdeadyet.com. There's a lot of really terrific information. And I brought a few one-page sheets if anyone would be interested in educating one of their friends who might be interested in this topic. So they're writing here. I have a few I'd be glad to share with you. This is not the dominant view that I have shared, but it is a passionate view of a few people in this room, and maybe more than a few. So thank you on that one. I now have to take a breath, because that is a pretty heavy topic. And I'll take a breath. And I will take off my Not Dead Yet coat. And I'll put on my Concrete Change coat, which is the movement that I've spent most of my time with over the last 30 years almost. And the goal of Concrete Change was and is every new house with basic access. In the early 80s, I was reading the Disability Rights magazine that Mark referred to. And I really think in terms of history, the influence of those early disability rights magazines can hardly be overestimated. So I was reading these and hoping to join a movement, but then Mark came to town, and you heard his story, and I was very, very glad to join with ADAPT. And I went on my first ADAPT trip to San Francisco in 1987, taking a day off from work because I was still teaching English as a second language. It was really, really a transformative experience. It was terrific. At first I had that feeling, and I like to remember it. Ooh, these people are kind of in bad, aren't they? Ooh, they're blocking the streets. This is bad behavior. And I thought, hey, wait. What is the goal here? And should we not drop politeness in favor of push? And I came home from that gathering where the goal was a lift on every new bus. And speaking of one idea pollinating the next, it occurred to me very suddenly, a zero-step entrance on every new house. Lift on every new bus, a zero-step entrance on every new house. Now, I had been paying the price of lack of access to houses since I was a little child, when I first became disabled. You know, unable to go in the house next door and play with the kids. Then I became a young adult. Really, really hard to find some place to live so I could be independent in the community. And then, you know, the years pass and I can't go really safely into the homes of my own brothers and sisters because they don't have accessible houses. Not that they're bad people, the houses just weren't out there. So in spite of the fact that I had lived it on a daily, almost daily basis, the light bulb hadn't gone off. I mean, you've had that experience where a light bulb was off, and it did go off, and a dad tells me, have that happen. Zero-step entrance on every new house. I knew from the beginning of that in order for construction practices to change in virtually every new house, it would be essential that the features be very few in number, but that they be the ones that enable the absolute essentials. Get into the house with one entry without steps and fit through the interior doors, including the bathroom door, which is often the narrowest door of the house. And one of my colleagues from Denver once characterized it with me in a few words: get in and pee. Next slide, please. Does that show the t-shirt?
House.
Yeah.
With the shirt now.
Okay.
With the shirt?
Yeah. Our t-shirt, made in 1989, highlighted those few features. A shirt is now here in the UGA archives. Through articles in the little disability rights magazines, the movement and the work moved quickly beyond Georgia and even internationally, though still based in Georgia. And it was through the international movement that the word visitability came to me, because at that time we didn't have that word, we were just calling it basic access. And then this Japanese architect, a young guy in a wheelchair, who was touring the United States, had heard of our first little victory, which was the Habitat for Humanity houses in Atlanta, every new house with access. They tried the first 30, pretty revolutionary. Houses built with access deliberately for people who did not have disabilities. And so Yoshi came to see those houses, and at that time he told me, you know, in Europe they call that visitability. And I thought, what a perfect word, even though it's a long one and kind of hard to say, because it immediately takes people's heads from housing for people with disabilities into how all houses are built. Next slide, please. It's blank on purpose. Visitability advocates have asserted a reality that many people still have trouble fully realizing, that limiting access just to houses with special homes designated for people with disabilities is unnecessary, cruel in its consequences, and fiscally unwise. Unnecessary because we learned over time that what we suspected was true, that the basics can be put in almost all new houses at virtually no cost. Cruel because the failure to do that leaves people isolated in their own homes, unable to be at the party, unable to get into even their extended families' homes without extensive help and prearrangement. And fiscally unwise because the falls that occur to many older people when they're going up entry steps end up sending them to the emergency ward and surgeries as the number one reason older people go to the emergency ward. And also because steps on narrow doors keep people from coming home from the hospital. People of any age, whether it's a young person in a car wreck or an older person who has had a stroke. With the high cost of institutionalization, borne mostly by public expenditures. Thus, the goals of visitability are narrow in concept, but broad in impact. Next slide, please, Matt. In the old days, People told advocates that access in virtually all new houses was an impractical quest. Back then, we had to respond with how and why we thought it could be done. But after years of advocacy, we now know it can be done because it has been done. Some Habitat for Humanity affiliates build every house with access. Next slide, please. Here's an example from Birmingham, Alabama. Next slide, please. A handful of for-profit builders construct visitability as a matter of course, such as this beautiful example on the high-cost end from Atlanta. Next slide, please. And a few municipalities, based on advocacy for visitability across the United States, build every new house in the city with basic access and at no extra cost, as testified to in writing by building commissioners. Here's an example from Tucson, Arizona, where more than 25,000 visitable houses have gone up. And the photo is of the primary visitability advocate there, who along with his wife spent years working on that ordinance to cover every new house in Tucson. Next slide, please. And here's an example from Bolingbrook, Illinois, where more than 4,000 visitable houses have gone up over basements, which formerly we were told was unfeasible. And now they say they do this for no extra money because they have found the methods once the law was there. And the snapshot on this picture shows the primary advocate there in Bolingbrook. So by now we know that there are no construction or enforcement complexities or cost reasons not to build basic access in virtually all new houses. Political opposition has been a formidable barrier to change. Our large opponent has been the National Association of Home Builders, whose national and state lobbyists have been a strong force and a continuing force against attempt to develop policy. They misstate the need, misstate the costs, with the primary motivation that they don't want to be regulated, except when the regulation assists them, and then they do like to be regulated. So next slide, please. We visited their national convention when it met in Atlanta, where they had 60,000 members present. And we brought our banner and our flyers explaining to the public why we were calling them the National Association of Hypocritical Builders. Because their flyers would show these beautiful children in wheelchairs, but their actions showed opposition on every front. Usually successful, but not always. Next slide, please. This slide shows a public education event we held with a few dozen people with disabilities and allies at the grand opening of a housing development in Atlanta that had built every new house with barriers, even though we had met the developers numerous times over 2 years to educate them. And one of these balloons is also in the UGA archives. Next slide, please. But the great majority of the work on my part and the part of advocates across Georgia and advocates across the United States has not been civil disobedience or demonstrations, although those have been the most fun, but rather years of meetings, letters, phone calls, meetings that went nowhere, meetings that occasionally went somewhere, most of which produce no perceivable victories, but some of which do. And some of these daily documents are also in the archives waiting for some graduate student in 20 years to look up things about how every new house became accessible when it's already a reality, and they're saying, I couldn't believe that we didn't used to do this. So the visitability movement just has to keep conveying the message over and over again. Next slide, Matt. Far more people at home after mobility impairments rather than in institutions. Next slide. and everybody at the party. Next slide. Everybody at the party. Houses are the last part of the built environment in the United States, still routinely built with no access. To continuing to work on that challenge is one of the tasks of the next generation. I like to read about not just the successes and triumphs of other human rights movements in the United States, the frailties. I like to read about the errors, the frailties, and the internal squabbles. Not only because it's interesting, but because it confirms that human rights movements are made up of ordinary people doing their best. And then somehow they take on a beauty and a breadth and a wonderfulness that is far beyond any one person's ability or personalities. The disability rights movement is one of the great social change movements of the 20th and 21st century. And I personally consider it a great happiness and privilege that I could take part in it.
I think Eleanor, back to that one person, Eleanor was a full-time school teacher, weren't you? When she started, concrete changed in a room in her house at that time. And she ran that from a room in her house. So we're not talking about big budgets and a lot of staff. What we're talking about is a dream and an idea and then the passion and commitment to make it happen. And so, Eleanor, took responsibility for trying to move that dream and idea forward, and it grew into an international movement. The other thing is, why don't you tell them the book you published?
First of all, I want to plug Mark's book. This is the Mutual Admiration Society. It's just that
I was hoping you would do that.
Oh, really?
No, I'm just kidding.
I read it and I really liked it. It really captures the movement from my point of view, in a very readable way. And I just really enjoyed it. And then he's referring to the children's book that my friend Nadine Green and I wrote, called Libby and the Cape of Visitability, which was fun to write. The only children's book on the subject, as far as I know.
And then Tom's also got a book.
Yes, turn off my microphone.
That's right here. Okay.
That's fine. Susan Earl and I have a book, Wadi Welcome in the Beloved Community, which tells the story of how Savannah did better than Savannah usually does. I'll leave it there.
So a lot of those books that are part of the collection are also still available. Shelly?
Okay, I'm Shelly, and I do not have a book. I almost fell out of place, coming in last behind all of these walking history books. In fact, I feel as though my boss, Pat Puckett, should actually be up here. I know there are times when we engage in conversation and just to hear her talking about how things started and how she was involved was really amazing to me. But I won't be before you long because Mark really kind of touched on everything that I wanted to talk about. But I'll just give a little bit more detail. I am with the Statewide Independent Living Council, and how SILK, what we like to call SILK, kind of all got started. Well, so let's back up. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 was an important piece of legislation for disability rights in the United States. It prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in federal employment and or in any federally funded programs. Now, amendments to the act later mandated that the states establish statewide independent living councils, or SILCs, to provide guidance for the development and expansion of independent living programs. Well, just last month, September, Georgia SILC celebrated its 20th anniversary. Wow. September 1995, Georgia SILC was established, and Patricia Puckett was appointed to the position of executive director. She has been the only ED that Georgia SILC has seen. And I can truly say, being the newbie on the block, that she has definitely laid a great foundation for us to build upon. And with her guidance, the first center for independent living was established in August of 1998, Disability Action Center. And now today, Georgia actually has 9 centers of independent living throughout the state. So the SILC continues to provide technical assistance to the centers and educate our legislative leaders on the barriers and needs of people with disabilities. Now, some of the pictures that you're going to be seeing kind of rotating behind me are just rallies and marches that have taken place over the years. Most of these are actually in Washington, D.C., with the National Council on Independent Living. And this is something that takes place every year, usually late July and August. So once again, Mark kind of touched on the ICWP program, or excuse me, the Independent Care Waiver Program, which we call ICWP. And so we just touched on this briefly, how they kind of all got started. Docket number S89A0561, State of Georgia versus McAfee. Larry McAfee, a mechanical engineer, was paralyzed in a motorcycle accident in 1985. And he had to use a ventilator to breathe. Well, he filed a petition in Fulton Superior Court, August of 1989, seeking a determination that he be allowed to turn off his ventilator, which would result in his death. He also prayed that the ventilator not be restarted once it was disconnected. Through the assistance of an engineer, Mr. McAfee had devised a means of turning off the ventilator himself by way of a timer. He had requested that he be provided a sedative to alleviate the pain which would have occurred when the ventilator was disconnected. Larry McAfee became so frustrated with his limitations, he decided he would rather die than to continue living forcibly in multiple nursing homes. At one point, McAfee even spent 8 months in the intensive care unit of an Atlanta hospital because the state of Georgia refused to fund independent living at all. His fight for the right to die received national attention. And in the course of doing a couple of interviews, McAfee told Joe Shapiro of the U.S. News and World Report that the worst thing about his disability was that people treated him as though he was invisible. You're looked upon as a second-rate citizen. People say, you're using my taxes. You don't deserve to be here. You should hurry up and leave. He told ABC's Nightline, if you're a citizen or a resident of Georgia and you become ventilator dependent, you better be prepared to become an outcast, unwanted by the state. Well, while the fight to end his own life was taking place, there was an advocacy group in Atlanta of about 20 plus people, led by Mark, Eleanor, Pat, and they issued a press statement condemning Georgia's Attorney General, and others who supported McAfee's petition for assisted suicide. They declared themselves outraged that our state for years left Larry McAfee without enough support for independent living and now steps in willingly to help with his suicide. The state creates an unbearable quality of life and then steps in and says disabled people should be assisted to die because their quality of life is so poor. Well, by this time, Larry's legal battle for the right to end his life ended with a Georgia Supreme Court ruling in his favor. Well, during this time, Larry was fighting for the right to die. He was living in a nursing home in Birmingham, Alabama. And while he was in this nursing home, he met Dr. Russ Fine. And Dr. Fine was the director of the Injury Prevention Research Center at the University of Alabama. And as their friendship grew, Dr. Fine persuaded Larry to give life just one more chance. And with the people from the United Cerebral Palsy offered him creative possibilities to regain control of his life and to work in computer engineering, Larry indeed had a change of heart. Larry wanted to live. McAfee soon moved to a personal care home in Augusta and was taught to operate a specifically equipped computer. Well, this strong group of advocates here in Atlanta saw the situation as a door to press for a waiver programs that would cover the increasing costs of care for Larry and others in similar situations. First, the group went to Commissioner Aaron Rogers of the DHS, or Department of Health and Human Services, and with no real progress, the group kept climbing the chain of command and sought the help of Deputy Ross Holt, that was the governor's second in command. Well, knowing that this small yet persistent group of advocates weren't going anywhere, Deputy Cole reached out to Pat Puckett and some Warm Spring providers and asked, how can we solve this problem? Because by this time, Larry's cost of care was becoming astronomical. This is when independent living and the waiver programs were introduced to the state of Georgia. Larry himself, in the end, testified before Georgia state legislators, calling upon them to find independent living. Well, as a result of these pioneers' hard work and commitment, Jenny Langley, as Mark touched on, in 1992, became a quadriplegic for the second time, resulting in her dependency on ventilator to regulate her breathing. Became the model for what is now the Independent Care Waiver Program, or ICWP. When she proved to the state of Georgia that she could save the government money by managing her care in the community, where it was more cost efficient than staying in the hospital, where her care was costing the state $7,000 a week. With the support of Shepherd's Spinal Center, Jenny proved over the course of 1 year that she could live at home on $125 a day. Her success encouraged the Georgia legislature at that time to commit $105,000 in state and federal funds to a 3-month pilot program for 6 or 7 people with disabilities. Jenny became the first recipient of the ICWP here in the state of Georgia. Those of us now on the waiver owe her and the people you see before you and in this room a legacy of community-based supports for people with severe disabilities. She proved that with state support, she not only could live independently, but she could live well independently. Thus, with her example, Georgia's Independent Care Waiver Program was born and modeled after her success. Her ability to stay in the community while at the same time saving the state money encouraged the state to expand the program. And in that same year, the Federal Health Care Financing Administration, which oversees Medicaid, approved a $1.2 million budget for the fiscal year 1993. A sum that will allow up to 25 disabled people $50 to $250 a day to pay for home care. Since that time, the waiver has grown to support many individuals who otherwise would be forced to nursing homes where the quality of life can be so bad that individuals like Larry McAfee will petition the courts for the right to die rather than to live within them. And once again in 1993, a movie was switched telling the story of Larry McAfee and Dr. Russ Fine came out. It was put on television. And Larry McAfee passed away October of 1995. Well, when I started kind of researching Larry McAfee and the ICWP program, I really became emotional because I moved to the state of Georgia 10 years ago, and I actually became a participant of the ICWP program. And just to know that I know the people who helped get this program off the ground. It's amazing to me. How often do you get to meet your heroes? How often do you have opportunity to walk amongst them, talk to them, learn from them? It really kind of sparked a fire in my belly once again, because advocating and fighting for what should be just simple things is tedious work. And I'm amazed that these people are still in the fight. But we need new people to start to carry that torch. And for whatever reason, Pat saw something in me that makes her feel as though I can take this torch a little bit further. Well, once again, these people are just tremendous. And I think we just need to take a second and honor them with your applause. Working on changing or trying to change some of the policies in regards to ICWP. We have a legislative agenda that I brought some handouts and one-pagers to. I would encourage you all to grab them. They're on the outer table, to look over them, to see some of the changes that needs to take place in order for people with disabilities to not only be able to remain on the waiver, but to work and do some other things that kind of, as times change, people change, situations change, and so policy is changed. But please grab some of our information. We also have flyers or one-pagers on home modification. things that we're looking to do in this coming session. So it was a privilege to sit up here with some beautiful, beautiful people. Like I said, walking history books. And we should have these conversations just more often. They're fascinating to me. I'm a transplant from California. So once again, I wasn't this active because a lot of things were kind of in place. But to come here and to continue to have to fight for things, I'm just proud to have great leadership and people that I can follow behind. So I thank you for your undivided attention.
So you know why Pat handed the baton out to Shelly. So let's hear it for Shelly. You know, there's the story, and there's the rest of the story, and there's the whole story and all that stuff, and that's what I think this collection can help inform. There is a lot, I know, between what Pat passed along, I passed along, Carol Jones passed along, and others passed along, about those couple of years of Larry and Jenny. You know, some real fascinating moments, including the occupation of the Department of Community Health Commissioner's office, as Shelly alluded to, the Nightline story. You know, just a lot of good stuff. And once again, it's just important to, you know, it's not reading that stuff because you want to, you know, I was never much of a history buff, but it's interesting when you read it in the context of a lot of people want to go to the next step, and having the you know, that history really helps inform that next step. We're not doing too bad, 12, 15 minutes behind, so I think we can catch up. But can we hear for the panel once again? Most people here learn something new? Yeah. Okay. And now you know where a lot of that content is, so as this stuff gets broken down into displays like it is outside, or PowerPoints, or more movies, or social media pieces, or whatever, we can continue to educate. So thanks, panel.
Hey, Mark,
yeah.
wanted to open it up for a few minutes of Q&A.
Did you want to do that now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah.
You know, if I followed the agenda, I'd be a lot better off. You need it on one page. All right, we're going to do a little Q&A before we have Sue Jamison, who's going to kind of drill down on the Olmstead decision, which is another gift that Georgia provided the rest of the country. Any particular questions to Shelly or Eleanor or Tom?
Hey, Al, would you talk a little bit about life worthy of life?
Yes, I would be glad to. Over on that quilt, that Pat and Dottie of t-shirts, you'll see one square for life worthy of life. I want to tip my hat to Nancy Moulton, who has passed away. She was very passionate about the issue of the not dead yet issue, but there was no not dead yet. And she and a few of us, under the Let's Get Together umbrella, started a group called Life Worthy of Life. There's only 2 t-shirts that I know of. 3. That one on the quilt, one in my drawer, and one I sent to the president of Not Dead Yet at her request, Diane Coleman. But Nancy was, in fact, we went up to a gathering. Nancy Moulton, Barbara, my friend at that time partner, and a couple other Georgians, to a little national gathering, looking around at the death things that were going on, and there was no group. So we just sat and talked for a weekend. Lucy, Gwen, and Tom in Tennessee, and that incredible conversation with many, many, many silences essentially kind of led to Not Dead Yet. And So people like Nancy Moulton, who created Life Worthy of Life. A lot of people have passed on, deserve a tip of the hat to all of this. And just a word about the name Life Worthy of Life quickly. Thank you, Tom. In Germany, when the euthanasia movement was in full swing, which is very, very lively here in the USA as well, very broad-based. A very influential book was titled by professors. This was in the intelligentsia class, like it is here. By professors was translated from the German to be, the translation is Life Unworthy of Life. And it's all about these leeches on society that really should not be living on. We took that phrase, Life Unworthy of Life, and made the t-shirt Life Worthy of Life at Nancy's instigation. I wish we had a t-shirt, one of those to put in the, but the quilt will be in the, will eventually go to the archives maybe, or you're not sure?
It's a toss-up between the archives and the Civil and Human Rights Museum in Atlanta.
Any other question? I mean, part of what you see, I mean, I know we've thrown a lot of content at you in the first 3 hours, and we have another hour of content before, you know, the photo op outside and the reception, but a lot of what took you here is just a reframing. You know, it's not about paternalism. You know, it's not about pity. You know, there are just terms that come up here. And I used to go around talking about the housing issue from the standpoint of how many of you live in that kind of house, and now I reframed that question, and I reframed it from the standpoint of how I'm going to do this because it takes a little time. Is how many would like to live in this kind of house? You ready?
What kind of house?
That's what I'm getting ready to describe. How many would like to live in this kind of house? A home that you could resell to anybody. A home that anybody could visit. A home that if something happened to you like it did me 44 years ago, your parents wouldn't have to spend a lot of money renovating the house. And a home that you could age in place. How many would like to live in a home that meets those 4 criteria? Now the next question is how many of you live in that kind? And there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect because it's in my backyard, therefore I need it, therefore I do it. But if I want to watch the Falcons or the Braves maybe win a World Series or the Super Bowl, I could do it in someone else's house. Or, as I used to make a joke, guess who's not coming to dinner? You can go, well, thank you, because we understand you eat a lot. So, but my point is, a lot of this is about reframing. And Tom brought it up in the, normalization and Wolf Wilsonberger, and, I like that collecting the connection type stuff. Because when it's all said and done, I was talking to a professor, and I said this to the students yesterday. A professor over at Oxford, I think I saw Kristen in the room that she's worked with. He's been out of commission for about a year with cancer, and he called me back up because he likes to take his social justice students to Atlanta for a week of true grounding, meaning they go under bridges and they go to shelters and they go to different places to learn firsthand about stuff. And he's back to scheduling that again for next year. And fortunately, Shepherd in this way writes part of that narrative that he's trying to introduce them to. And I said, well, what did you learn in the last year as a result of this battle and journey you had with cancer? And he said, it's all about relationships. It's all about relationships. And so I'm going to leave that with you and introduce you to somebody who I have a relationship with. Sue Jamison, who's going to talk about a relationship she has with a couple of people and how that led into a Supreme Court decision is now the law of the land, and once again a gift to the rest of the country right here, born in Georgia.
It seems that we've been
sitting still for a long time, and I was feeling like maybe you guys want to sneak out for a few minutes, catch your breath, but. I just want to thank everybody who somehow got us all together. It's so amazing for us to be all together in one room, all the people I admire. And I think my feeling from listening to everybody is this: I really have to say I was not a part of that long struggle. I did sit in during undergraduate years against the Vietnam War and civil rights and stuff, but I didn't know or identify with the disability rights movement. And I feel like you've taken care of me in a way and allowed me, sort of like adopted me for little periods of time so that I would feel a part of it. And I'm rather privileged and honored, seriously, to have known all you. That includes a bunch of lawyers who are not here today, but who also fought this battle for decades. And then Sue comes along and they said, "Hi, Sue," and they were so nice to me. But I was really not part of those decades and decades of struggle that we've been hearing about today. History. The older you get, the more the word history has significance. And I'll give you a quick little example of my personal life. I've been grandparenting for the last few years since I retired from Atlanta Legal Aid. And I was on a little hike with my son and my 8-month-old grandson, and we got lost, which is sort of traditional for me on most hikes. Children might know. And I said to my son, "Look, I think I know where I am. I recognize that tree." And by then, of course, he whipped out the Google map and everything else, and he looks at me and he says, "Seriously, Mom, a tree? That is ancient history." And I think some of you are my age and you know what those kids mean, those 40, 30-somethings mean when they say ancient history. They mean you. So, okay. Anyway, we know the history of disability advocacy in Georgia long predates the Olmstead decision. And so thinking about being with you today, I decided to look at some disability cases that Phyllis Holman, who is the Georgia Legal Services Program Director, was kind enough to send me. And she sent me a list of cases beginning in Georgia in the 1970s. And then Josh Norris, who's with us, also with Georgia Advocacy Office, of course, sent me another list of the many important cases that their office has been involved in for many, many years before and after Olmstead. And then my own office, who did not come up with a list because I didn't give them time, has been working in this field for years too. So I collected at least the legal services cases and the Georgia advocacy cases, and I copied them and I put them out there on the table because I can't talk to you, of course, about all of them in 20 minutes, but I thought you might want to see the long and interesting list of cases that have been litigated in Georgia over the years. Legal advocacy is unpredictable, it's very political, and it's always a huge risk. Our courts sometimes provide a powerful answer for the vulnerable and the voiceless, but sometimes they miss the boat altogether. So I think I have concluded that there is the luck factor, the mood of society at the time, and the whim, perhaps whim isn't right, but the inclination of a particular judge or panel of judges. So whether this legal advocacy occurs in a probate court or in a class action in federal court, it is really just a way, in my view, to gain a foothold so that we can take bigger steps, or as a tool so that we can build new bridges. And my personal belief is that legal advocacy is absolutely necessary where the powerless have difficulty making their voices heard. and where the rights of people with disabilities, especially in the areas of segregation, need to be enforced. I think litigation is and must be pursued seriously, responsibly, and often. There are the everyday cases and the impact cases. My own work over 40 years, which I can't believe, but it's true, consisted of mostly everyday cases. My disability work began in 1979 in Florida when I happened to visit a state hospital. I was inspired at that moment to bring the services of Jacksonville area legal aid to people whose, to me, it was obvious their most fundamental rights to freedom and survival could no way be addressed by any legal advocate. They were completely isolated and had no access to legal advocacy. So that's where I became inspired to do that kind of work on behalf of people in institutions, and appropriate phrase for the day, the rest is history. That's what I did from then on. When I moved to Georgia, I set up a project focusing on people in institutional settings. I picked one old Georgia case to talk about out of those lists of disability rights cases because I noticed that it weirdly foreshadowed Olmstead. The case I picked is JL versus JR versus Parham. I see some heads nodding. I chose it because it reveals the focus of the law in those days, the attitude of the court, and the heroic battle of Georgia Legal Services Program. I should mention it's about kids. That seems to be the theme here that I didn't realize, and I'm not adequate to give credit to all the people who have since worked for children. I know about the Children's Freedom Initiative, of course, and the hard work that GAO has done. So let me make that point. But this case was in the 1970s, and if we look at it and compare it to the decision in Olmstead, I think it's helpful and interesting to get a historic perspective. JL was born in 1964. He was admitted to a state hospital when he was 6, and his family asked that he be institutionalized indefinitely because he had been expelled from school. The professionals strongly recommended against it and said what he needed was a, quote, foster care setting that was warm, supportive, and truly involved, with a truly involved couple. The recommendation was never followed. And by the time of the Supreme Court decision a few years later, JL was dead. By the way, they never mentioned, maybe somebody here knows, I don't know how he died or why, but it's not mentioned in the opinion. JR, the other plaintiff, was placed in foster care when he was 3 months old. And after 7 foster care placements, he was institutionalized. He was waiting for a foster care placement, which was never identified or developed. So the JR lawsuit was filed as a class action on behalf of JL and JR and all the kids who were institutionalized and basically indefinitely with no end in sight. The legal argument was based on the due process clause. The argument is that these kids were institutionalized without a hearing, basically. It was very difficult to fashion an argument that the state had any obligation to provide these children with community alternatives. So the legal basis for these cases in those days was at least they should have a hearing before they're essentially put away. The district court listened to testimony from experts, from lay experts. They even went out to visit hospitals, and they fashioned a remedy in 1976 which required the state to, quote, spend whatever amount was necessary to provide non-hospital facilities for all members of the class who could be treated in a non-hospital setting. How about that? Wow. That sounds like Olmstead 20 years before Olmstead. But the district court was appealed by the state of Georgia. And many of you know that's what happened to us in Olmstead, is we had a good decision and it was appealed by the state. So you can imagine how terrified we were when that happened. And I'm sure GLSP wasn't happy when the state appealed. But unfortunately, in their case, the United States Supreme Court reversed, and there is a footnote in that Supreme Court decision I'm going to share with you. This is the court that said, sorry, we are not going to rule that these kids have any rights to community services, or for the most part to hearings, although they did on remand, the kids who were state wards were awarded hearings, and GLSP has been representing them for years. But on the issue of community alternatives, the Supreme Court would not find that there was any legal right to that. I want to just get back to the footnote, because they rolled that way despite this. A footnote in their opinion. Thousands upon thousands of elderly patients now confined to the back wards of state mental institutions were first admitted as children 30, 40, or even 50 years ago. And a recent report by a state estimates that 1 of every 4 children admitted to its mental hospitals can anticipate being permanently hospitalized for the next 50 years of their life. It's shocking to me that a court recognized this, put it in the opinion, and then said, too bad for you. And there is a revealing comment buried in Chief Justice Berger's opinion. He cites with approval Georgia's relentless building of new institutions in the 60s and the 70s, many of which, as you know, have been downsized or closed. He states, quote, Justice Berger, ironically, as states have expanded their efforts to assist the mentally ill, their actions have been subjected to increasing litigation. So any guess where he's going to turn up? And what the court's view was of us troublemaker litigators. Okay, well, you can imagine what happened to that great 1977 district court opinion. It was reversed and remanded, and as I've stated, it did get some relief in the due process area for kids. How differently the Supreme Court in 1979 looked at facts that were very similar to the Olmstead facts and completely failed to understand the inhumanity of segregation. When I think about that footnote, I picture the 30,000 unmarked graves in that once forgotten cemetery in Milledgeville, because the symbolism, well, the Supreme Court acknowledged those thousands and thousands and then ignored them in the decision. So it's somehow very symbolic and heartbreaking. The JL case was filed because everything else had failed for those plaintiffs and for that class. But in the 70s, even passionate advocates were not alleging, and sympathetic courts were not finding, discrimination based on segregation. Why? Because the focus was on the conditions of the institutions, which were outrageous and bad, and on the due process clause of the United States Constitution. And whatever the extremities were of those institutional conditions, and however shocking the lack of procedural protections, the root of the problem wasn't obvious yet, at least not to the legal advocacy community, which was state-sanctioned discriminatory segregation of individuals with disabilities. The Supreme Court in '79 was not sympathetic to the claim that institutionalization was dehumanizing, damaging, and counter-therapeutic. The JL case won a significant victory for children in that it got the hearing rights for at least wards of the state. But by the way, they didn't get that hearing until after they were institutionalized. It's called a post-commitment hearing. And only after they've been in the institution for a while did GLSP get a notice that this kid might need a hearing and representation. And There was another case mentioned there in 1988, again, Georgia Legal Services fighting the good fight, called SHB Edwards. I think it was called SH and PF. Does anybody remember that one?
Yes.
And the court again specifically ruled that the state had no obligation to provide community alternatives to institutional confinement. Okay, now we'll speed ahead 20 years and talk quickly about Lois and Elaine when they filed their lawsuit in 1995. Like JL and JR, they were stuck in a Georgia State hospital for much of their lives, beginning as children, and they had very little hope for life anywhere else. Lois was in her 30s when we filed. She'd been institutionalized for most of her life, and, since she was 14. And she was finally released shortly after she filed her case to a group home with a detailed community-based service plan developed through the litigation. And she now lives, as most of us know, on her own with personal supports. She never went back to the hospital. She's a respected artist with regular exhibits of her work. Elaine had been hospitalized 65 times before she got the services she needed through litigation. And once she was finally free of the fear of reinstitutionalization, her outgoing, sociable personality came through, and particularly her sense of humor. And I will always remember how nurturing she was of Lois and concerned about her and making sure she was okay and writing thank you notes to the lawyers. That was Elaine. Elaine died from complications of from surgery. She got 8 years of freedom. So it is Title II of the ADA that enabled Lois and Elaine to file a case based on a claim of discrimination rather than due process, because Title II prohibits discrimination by public entities and in public programs. Once we had Title II, the argument could shift from the due process clause to the state's affirmative duty to provide services in integrated settings. And then the regulation promulgated under the ADA called the Integration Regulation, which specifically requires, again, the state to provide services in integrated settings. Justice Ginsburg said this case will decide whether or not Title II of the ADA prohibits discrimination to the point where it requires the state to provide integrated services. We may be getting used to that, but I feel like a broken record when I keep repeating it, because for us that was an amazing step. And the state, since the Olmstead case cannot justify segregation by showing that it provides treatment or rehabilitation or services or whatever it provides in a segregated setting, that is not permissible under the ADA. You could not make that argument before Olmstead. My favorite part of the decision is the court's analysis of why isolation is discriminatory. I hope you'll bear with me if I just read this, because I really do think it reflects a lot of what we've talked about today. You're going to hear so many echoes of what other people have said, and this is the Supreme Court's language. Recognition that unjustified institutional isolation of persons with disabilities is a form of discrimination reflects two evident judgments. And here's Justice Ginsburg. First, segregation of people who can handle and benefit from community settings perpetrates unwarranted assumptions that persons so isolated are incapable of or unworthy of participating in community life. That reflects what we just heard about life worthy of life. Second, confinement in an institution severely diminishes, and this is really like, duh, but here's what she diminishes the everyday life activities of individuals, including family relations, social contacts, work options, economic independence, educational advancement, and cultural enrichment. Things have improved since Olmstead, I think partly because of the case, but I think mostly because of the efforts of advocates to enforce the case. And our challenge, especially if you hear the echoes of Justice Ginsburg, is to use that concept of segregation to expand the case and to think creatively about all the places where people with disabilities are still segregated. We can see crumbling state institutions and we can say, great, glad that's over, or we hope it's over. But we also see the sheltered workshops, the schools, the detention centers, individuals on waiting lists at risk of institutionalization. And in my view, the most outrageous example, obvious and outrageous example of disability segregation is the nursing home industry. I don't know how they still get away with it, but they are. It's just incredible that still goes on and on. Okay, in closing, I want you to know that our Supreme Court adventure in Olmstead was never imagined. We didn't anticipate it, we didn't plan it, we didn't have some grand strategy, and we were terrified when the court granted cert. But that's when the entire national community of civil rights advocates rallied around our legal aid program, and that ad hoc coalition of amici in the Supreme Court case convinced, and all the other groups, the people that appeared to adapt on the steps of the Supreme Court, wheelchairs lining the district court argument, every possible advocacy organization that cared about people with disabilities became part of the effort to get the Supreme Court to rule that Lois and Elaine should not be institutionalized. When we got back to legal aid, we learned that freedom from segregation is not measured by one case, but part of a complex, heroic fabric woven by the efforts of those who went before and those who continue to struggle now. Thank you.
Thank you. You can stay up there for a while if you want. You just grab that chair. We're just going to start wrapping it up. Al Duvall with People First is not able to be with us, but there are some other People First reps here. If you just raise your hand, other People First reps that will be available during the reception if you want to talk to some of them about some of the work they've been involved with or are involved with. Just a small change of plans. We're going to get everybody up here that's been up here before just to make a comment or so about the future. They're already setting up the food and hydration outside. So what I would encourage you to do is we'll just go down the panel and have people say, you know, what their thoughts are about the future. We'll go out here and have a little, like I say, nourishment and hydration, and then about 5:45, take a group shot. And if you want to go home, fine. But while you're out here, up and down both halls are some of the artifacts that people mentioned. And also inside the exhibit area are some. And if I understand it right, Matt, they're going to be up until next summer?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. And so some of the content in there will be up until all summer, but the people donating things might actually change some of the items you see in the display cases. So just know that that's not just here for today, that the stuff up and down the hallways I would check out today during the reception time, go back in the back and see what's back there, and you're going to see some things that are missing. You know, there's an interesting discussion about the area about, you know, war. And there's a piece in there about from the Paralyzed Veterans of America, but that's all we have so far, is that one piece. And we all know there's a chapter of PVA in Augusta, Georgia. So, you know, there are pieces of the collection that don't exist right now because people, you know, apparently don't understand the value of what they have in their drawers and their boxes, under their beds, in their attics, and in their garages. So if we can have all the panelists up here one more time. One comment about the future. we'll have a little food and drink, and then we'll do a group shot. And while you're having food and drink, mingle and look at what some of the artifacts. So Sue and I think Eleanor had to go. Tom, did Shelly have to go? Is there Shelly? Come on up. Pat, you mind just coming up and saying something? Yeah. I know, but you can't do that. And I understand that's really good for brain power for people over 60.
I'm pretty well.
65. Just going to be brief. You know, there is a future, meaning Shelly, I thought, did a great segue to that in a way. There's a lot of baton handing off going on right now in the movement. There's a lot of succession issues in the movement right now. You know, Zoe mentioned the students that it's not just about having an accessible disability student service office. It's about participating in the tradition of the arches on graduation. Or. So your charge is say something about what's next, what about the future, your thoughts about the future.
Well, I have no idea, really. That's the first thing, because, you know,
crystal ball is right in there.
well, I mean, you know, I don't know if I'm gonna wake up tomorrow morning. None of us really do.
Yeah.
I have one thought about the future. Seriously, one thought about the future is that as people of my generation age, I think we will connect, we will challenge certain structures in this country, one of which is the nursing home industry. And we'll challenge that with, from a different perspective that's been challenged before. With that said, that industry and the managed care system is going to be absolutely brutal. But when I've listened to my friends I've grown up with my whole life, people ain't going. And that's just how that is. So I mean, that might be another 10, 15 years, but I think in the next 10, 15 years, I mean, I do think that the baby boom generation is going to refine the 60s. So, I mean, you know, the joke in my world is, you know, when I was 20, somebody would be in the kitchen, you know, at a party, and somebody would say, psst, psst, you know, I can score some pot. You know, now it's my age in the kitchen at the party, somebody says, psst, know where I can find a home health aid? So, I mean, I think that's really kind of the future.
Yeah, the baby boom comes to silver tsunami.
Yeah, there you go.
So,
I guess I already said what I hope is the future, and now Tom is supporting that, is I hope we can just knock down the nursing industry with the same level of creativity, because it's really hard. We've been trying to do it at legal aid, you know, one case at a time, and there's many difficulties in challenging it, and it's a very complicated system. So I see that in the future. Also, the Department of Justice is a big part of the future of Olmstead and what they are doing in Georgia, trying to enforce and implement the rights of people to live in integrated settings. And I think what I'd say for the future is what has been said over and over again is individuals looking and committing and being passionate about one aspect of disability rights, whatever really turns you on, whether it's children or these psycho-ed schools now are being challenged, go with it. And you'd be amazed. People rally around and things get very exciting. But we need to have people, you know, the 20-somethings on up to our venerable age here need to kick in, and I'm sure they will.
future of advocacy and action. Okay. People first, right?
Yes, hi, my name is Christian Keynote, and the thing I want to talk to you all today about is transportation. I think it's very important that people with disabilities have city bus transportation, especially because it's hard for people with disabilities, especially people who can't drive, to get around. Also think it's very important that they have more wheelchair buses, because I don't think that they have enough right now to use for people with wheelchairs, and I also think that it's important that maybe we can maybe talk about getting a route out to Oconee so that people with disabilities who live, you know, out in Oconee can either get out and shop and do things, you know, in Oconee County. I think that would be important.
Good.
Thank you.
I think one of the things you bring up too is what's starting to happen around the country is it's not just about disability anymore. It's about transportation. Who are those natural allies in the community that are interested in transportation or housing? Same thing. It's not about housing for people with disabilities. It's about affordable, accessible, integrated housing for people. And who are the other groups that you can coalesce with to get that? I'm working with some students in Pittsburgh right now, you know, who are beginning to ask the questions about, you know, after they're out of the undergrad housing, trying to find affordable housing when they're graduate students. Well, there's a lot of students trying to find affordable housing as graduate students. So how can their disability student association link with the other groups that are working on these issues? So it's a broader coalition of people working on transportation or whatever. Shelly, the future of advocacy in action as you see it.
I am optimistic, and I don't know if it's, that's because I'm just kind of new to this, but I just feel that there is a kind of a paradigm shift that's taking place. I think we're starting to get people engaged. We're casting our nets out a little bit wider. It's not only disabled, but non-disabled. And as Tom and as Mark had mentioned, it's all about relationships. And I think the more that we can generate new relationships, establish old relationships, I think that we will be able to work together in order to get some things accomplished. I'm really excited about the next 3 to 5 years, and I really hope that with the foundations that have been laid, that we can build upon those. So I'm optimistic that things are going to be taking place, and the people as a whole are going to be coming together. I think you're going to be seeing more rallies. I think you're going to be seeing more marches in order to get some things accomplished. I'm not saying that it's going to be easy. I believe the work is definitely cut out for us, but I think that we're in a position now to really start making some noise again.
And we're going to let Pat Puckett, who y'all might know, is sliding in that quasi-retirement mode, kind of like Eleanor, and I have some comments about the future of advocacy and action in Georgia.
You know, since January, I've been doing one day at a time, so I don't know. I mean, I don't know. And I guess the future is something that will have to be figured out by Shelly and other people, because I don't know. And right now, what I'm just trying to figure out is how to keep my man taken care of. My man had a stroke in August, and so I am right now blessed with incredible personal care workers that we hired, or a worker that we hired, and terrific therapists. And Annie, the personal care assistant, is just, I mean, she's a gift. She's just an absolute gift. And the thing I love about her very much is that she's a Nazi like I am. Do the exercise, you know, so we're just working on getting Tim back to health so he can resume the role for which God intended him, and that is my cabana boy. Would you bring me my coffee every morning? And just take care of me. So I have no idea. I'm sure that advocacy will involve stuff that I don't do, like twit and tweet and stuff like that. And, you know, social media. And so I'm just going to let the youngins figure it out. And I'm just going to have to try to figure out how to live on Social Security and have the level of care that my man needs right now. And I will probably need one day my own self. So I'm just kind of like, one day at a time, so y'all handle it.
Like a lot of things you said, there's a lot of people in this room with a lot of expertise and a lot of life experiences. I'd like to just, give you an opportunity. Is there anything you'd like to say about what you think the future of advocacy and action in Georgia is? If you got a minute, we got a portable mic, right? Yep. Right there in the middle. Anybody want to say anything? Yeah, Lyle, come on up and grab the mic, because it is being recorded, so it's not just a matter of people hearing you here, it's about it being recorded. Both Tom and Pat hit on it, and I know Carol back here is also interested in it. This Carol and that Carol. There's a couple of Carols in here. But the whole idea of, if you are having this baby boom become a senior silver tsunami, and all the people that are going to be needed to provide the support, then where are those career paths, where are those benefits, where is that retirement kind of stuff? So Tom and Pat both hit on that. Go ahead, tell them who you are.
I'm one of those dinosaurs who's even older in the movement than Mark is. I met him in 1981, back when we were both children. My name's Jean Logan. I'm an immigrant from Wisconsin, where I was involved in creating a lot of the disability rights and early waiver programs back in the 70s and 80s that we've talked about. Hi, Tom. But I've been in Georgia now for 5 years, and I'm involved in looking at policy stuff, particularly at what's going on with Medicaid and with managed care. And I just was part of a team that finished a major study in Florida around what's happening. And so there are two issues that really are in the front of my brain that I wanted to share with you, so thanks for the opportunity. One is the people on waiting lists and their families and caregivers who are totally ignored as part of the provider community and the caregiver community. We have more people on waiting lists than we are serving on waivers. Their families, particularly once their children reach 22 and leave the school system, fall off a cliff. And with people with severe mental illness, their families are doing the primary caregiving. With transportation, families and extended families are the primary transportation providers in our communities. There is nowhere in public policy that this is being dealt with in any organized way. And so there are a whole lot of people in a lot of personal crisis who are not connected to advocacy and are not connected to peer support groups. So I think that's number one. And number two, I really got very worried in looking at the data from Florida. I haven't had a chance to look at the Georgia data the same way, but the re-isolation or institutionalization of people in the community as their support budgets get tighter. What we saw, Florida's gone to a budget for support waivers that's generated by a computer formula. And so you get so much money dependent on what your functional status is. As the costs of services, of personal care attendants, of day programs, of those kinds of things go up, guess what people are choosing not to do anymore? They're choosing not to use transportation. Well, if you don't use transportation, you basically are in your house and you're in your day program and you have no social life and very little. So in a way, we're reinstitutionalizing people in individual settings, which means they have less power of group advocacy. So those are the two things I'm seeing, and I hope those of you who are a lot younger than I am will take those on and make a difference.
You stirred the fire back in Pat.
Go, Pat.
Okay. I guess part of what, and I don't know how to do this yet, so it's scary to ponder it, and sometimes I'd rather play computer games than ponder the future, you know what I'm saying? But I think that we're going to have to figure out a way to rely less and less on good public policy, because I think that's a thing of maybe history. I'm not sure. But there's not much evidence right now, particularly in the Republican race for president, that there is any sanity in public policy whatsoever. And so, and you see, I mean, And the fact is that Georgia doesn't learn, Georgia bureaucracies don't learn anything anyway. They never have. They lay awake nights trying to figure out how to screw up really good ideas that people come up with. And I think that's true through at least 5 governors that I've seen. So I think that we have to start thinking about how we're going to figure out ways to rely on one another. And so, and you know, it's maybe co-ops, it's maybe land trusts, it's maybe importing youngins who are, I mean, people are dying to get to this country. As tough as we think it is every day, if you look at the world around us, we are, we're Mecca, you know, to people in many parts of the world. And our personal care assistant is from Jamaica. And I think the culture that she grew up in, and I don't know, it's a culture of kindness and sunniness, and I just think there's something about how she grew up that allows her to bring in the sunshine every day when she comes to see us. And so I think we're going to have to start thinking along the lines of never mind the Department of Community Health. Sorry, Shelly. I mean, all we can do right now with the Department of Community Health and agencies like that is just try to keep them from doing really bad and stupid things and fight them every step of the way every time they try to do stupid things. I mean, you know, I think that's the only thing we can do is to keep bad doo-doo from rolling downhill. In the meantime, we got to think about how we're going to forge tiny house communities or, you know, something that will share the kind of assistance and care that we're all going to need as we get older, and find youngins to drive us places, because the city buses are, there's as big as they're going to get, and there's as many of them as we're ever going to get, because the divide between wealth and non-wealth gets bigger. And as that gets bigger, the folks of wealth don't care about public infrastructure and caring and transportation for everybody. And so we're going to have to rely on one another. And like I said, I don't know what that looks like yet for myself or for anybody in this room, but I think it's time we start thinking about it and learning about it and working on it. And one thing I want to say about the nursing home industry, little known secret, they're turning on each other. And I'm liking it because they know what Tom said, we ain't going. And so the nursing home industry itself is saying, well, let's don't do these places anymore. Let's take people in for rehab after hip replacement or stroke and get them back home. And so they're providing community-based supports in a much bigger way than they did even 10 years ago. So that's changing.
It's a different financial incentive.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, is that the most we can do out of public policy is to create those kind of incentives. We cannot make public workers be good and nice and kind. We cannot do it. That's period. So
Can I comment?
We gotta learn from
a-
one another.
Yeah, somebody grab that microphone and run it to Eleanor. Hold on, Eleanor, because we really want to get it on tape.
Well,
And then we're going to do YouTube, just of you.
this is just a word about the nursing home industry, et cetera, that what ADAPT is trying to do brilliantly is to not take new money, take some of the money that's already going to the nursing home industry and sending it home to people. Yeah, so it wouldn't be abolish every nursing home, but there's no competition now, essentially. And the other thing is that I think that I want to remember and tell others is that some of the home health industry is not what we want to see. We keep talking about home assistance. We want what ADAPT is fighting for, and others, is money follows the person, that that $15 an hour you get goes to someone you or your family hires directly. What we don't want is more home health care by corporation, where huge amounts of money go to the investors and to the executives, which some people have rightly called a nursing home on wheels. So when we look at that we want more home health care, we want to say power to the people and not to the corporation while that's happening. Thank you.
Well, I know we have one final speaker that's with the university here. But what I just wanted to say was, we got people like Charlie Miller back here. Yay! And, besides Charlie being someone who just survived an adapt action in Utah.
Do you mind if I say something?
Yeah, let's get your microphone, because this is part of what Pat was talking about, was the next generation figuring it out, but hopefully figuring it out based on the kinds of content that are here, the kind of stories that are here, and the kind of dialogue that's, a little bit of dialogue that's been occurring today, that you get to dump all this stuff on these young folks like Charlie and go, dude, go for it.
Hi y'all, my name is Charlie Miller. I'm in the Kennesaw State Inclusive Learning Academy, and it has given me a bunch of opportunities to lobby in the state capitol, suit and tie, and dress nice, locally and nationally, and I felt very empowered. But recently, I went on my first adapt action, and boy, I have never lost my voice so hard in my life. It was so empowering. I felt like I was fighting for something that really mattered to myself and to my family and to my friends. It has really helped get me to understand what we need to do in the state of Georgia. And I want to say to you, we are ready to take up the mantle and fight for disability rights. Don't hold it against me.
We won't, but go ahead and tell them who your dad is.
He's a used car salesman.
You diverted the answer, but go ahead and tell them the rest of the story. And I think it's important for them to know that who you're connected to and what your life has been about up to now.
He is a state legislator, Butch Miller. He's a senator, and he has really been an inspiration to me to speak my mind and to fight for stuff I believe in. And he is supporting me 100% in whatever I do. And adapt is something I want to do.
And so Charlie's beginning to educate his dad about the future path. Thanks, Charlie. Lisa, did you want to say something? Then we'll have Toby, if you could come on up. Okay.
Real quick, just on future advocacy now and this year. It is voting year in 2016. And social services, I'm a nurse practitioner and also do the Post for Peace and Justice. As a nurse practitioner, the social services have been cut and cut and cut, as I know everybody here is very aware of. And it's very difficult to refer the way we used to way back. And if we do not get those social services so that you can do what we're talking about today, it's going to be much more difficult for Charlie and for everybody else that's coming along. So vote, get out there, look at what the issues really are, and please make sure everybody else does also. Number 2, outside that door there is an 8-foot post. They're called Post for Peace and Justice. Eleanor was instrumental. Eleanor and I live the same place, and we all have concrete change initiated places, and it's wonderful. And many people who do not have any family members or do not work in healthcare do not know what it's like for people that have disabilities. We did the post specifically for this because we have 13 spots on the Beltline and we want it out there, and any place else that it can be shown where there are people that do not know about disabilities to open their eyes and wake them up. Please take your picture with the post, put it on your social media, give yourself an opportunity to get that out and send it to people around. Okay, we have a website called postforpeaceandjustice.org. Please also post it on there so we have copies and can get them out. And I would like to take some of what we have today on short films. If you have anything that you can send me back or send to the site, we will get it out there and we will have a page that then can be shared on the Legacy site as well.
Hashtag GDHS 2015. Hashtag, I got it right that time. Hashtag GDHS 2015. And if, as you're going out there looking at the displays and the exhibits and you want to take some pictures, or as we take the picture outside after your nourishment and hydration, then we'd like to keep spending the content and the opportunities. One last thing, and then we're going to have Toby come up. Go ahead. Can you want my microphone?
Yeah, I can come up.
Come on up.
I'm Perry Abernathy, and I'm a former patient at Shepherd Center Hospital. I'd fallen off the roof back in 2003, used to be in a straw-controlled wheelchair. I became an advocate for disability rights in 2004. And my passion is access. Because being confined at your house, you get miserable and depressed. And you get to the point where you don't even want to live when you can't provide a living for your family. You can't get out and go shopping because you can't get into the store, and if you get in the store, you can't get to the bathroom. I've been in a wheelchair from the straw control to a manual wheelchair, up walking, back into a wheelchair, up walking, back into a wheelchair. So many times I felt like a yo-yo. And now I'm blessed to walk around with a cane. I forget where I leave my cane. So I'm blessed by the Lord, but I still have a burning passion when I see someone who is not disabled parked in the disability parking spot. Or they put their motorcycle in the area where your van accessible parking is supposed to be able to get out. Or someone else parks their car there and blocks the van accessible parking. So I worked with people first and got a little pamphlet that we made up that said, this is not a ticket, it's a friendly reminder that you're parked illegally. We used to stick them out on cars and stuff. We printed them in orange paper where they looked like a ticket. But as I pointed out to someone, if your motorcycle's parked there and it gets towed, the tow bill will be about $850. Not counting the parking ticket of $250. And it can be towed away. But I have a burning desire just to tell people that we have a right to get out and go places. Don't block it. You know, and I want to start a company up that just goes out and talks to people about access. That's my burning desire, is to tell people not to legally charge them with a court case that could happen to them, but to tell them what they're doing wrong, because most people don't even realize they're doing something wrong. Like I pointed out, they had the wrong toilet paper holder in the bathroom here. When they first put it in, they put the right one, but someone changed it to the wrong one. It's little things that makes it difficult to get up off the toilet. And they block the bar with the wrong toilet paper. Just little things that make it difficult for someone that has challenges standing.
So we still got a long ways to go. And if I could have Toby Graham, who's the university librarian and associate provost, come up and just kind of wrap it up for us. And like I say, outside for some hydration and nourishment, and then let's get a photo op.
Well, thank you so much. I'm Toby Graham, and I want to thank all of you
We are so grateful for the opportunity for the University of Georgia Libraries to be part of the event today. It has been such a special day in the life of our libraries here at UGA. It is work that you all are doing is tied in so tightly with the themes of social justice that the Russell Library is so interested in, of public policy when it works and when it doesn't, of advocacy, and it's just been a special time. And I will say that when I walked into this building today, the first person I saw was our building manager. He walked over to me, he said, "Toby, we've got to change the toilet paper holders." So we're on it. One of the things that was mentioned earlier was, and multiple times, was relationships. And so I'm glad that now the University of Georgia Libraries has a relationship with all of you. If this is your first time here in the building, I hope that it will be the first of many. We are so proud to have the archive here, the Disability History Archive for Georgia here, and Sheryl Vogt, who is the director of the Russell Library, Mat Darby with the Russell Library, and others are working so hard to build that archive and to share it with everyone. But of course, they don't create the records that go into it. And so I'll just reiterate the importance of working with them. If you have things or know people who have things that really will help to fill in a piece of that important history. So with that, I do want to thank, again, thank our friends at the Institute for Human Development and Disability and the Georgia Disability History Alliance for co-sponsoring this event with the Russell Library. So next up, I do welcome you to the reception out here in the hallway. And then at 5:45, right, we have our photo
out by the bus.
But that was awesome to see the bus when I walked up front of the building when I came up, I'll tell you. And I was also relieved to see that there was no parking ticket stuck up under the windshield when I came by. So anyway, thank you all so much, and I look forward to talking with you during the reception.
Grab your materials on the table too about how to donate content. Grab an 88 flag or whatever. But thanks a lot for being here. And once again, thanks for everybody that made this possible. If you want to know more about the Alliance, it's on the website. We have phone calls every quarter, etc. So thanks again, everybody.